Contents each delivered on Independence Day and on the Introduction. Enver Hoxha was the socialist leader of Albania from 1944 until his death in 1985. As the first secretary of the Party of Labour of Albania, he was chairman of the Democratic Front of Albania and commander-in-chief of the armed forces from 1944 until his death. The Democratic Front of Albania, Albanian, Fronti Demokratik I Shqipërisë, was the largest mass organization of the Party of Labour of Albania, known from 1941 to 1948 as the Communist Party of Albania, which united all other mass organizations of the party within it, was responsible for carrying out the party's cultural and social programs to the masses, and was in charge of nominating candidates in elections. A membership card of the Party of Labour of Albania, Partia e Punës së Shqipërisë, PPSH in Albanian, sometimes referred to as the Albanian Workers' Party. A short history of Democratic Front of Albania. On September 16, 1942, the National Liberation Front was established at the initiative of the Communist Party of Albania and with the aim of uniting all Albanians in a national liberation war against the Italian, and later Nazi German, occupiers. On November 29, 1944, the country was liberated, and the NLF began its first Congress on August 5, 1945. It elected Enver Hoxha chairman, renamed itself the Democratic Front, and oriented its work against the maneuvers of a reaction, its organizational consolidation, the activization of the masses in concrete actions, the political mobilization of the whole people to wipe out the remnants of fascism in the political, economic and cultural fields. Party historiography summed up the early work of the front as follows. The front was to be the mainstay of the people's power in its struggle to safeguard freedom and national independence, to reconstruct the country, to achieve its economic, social and cultural development on the road to socialism. The role of the front was the mobilization and political education of the broad masses of the people and the strengthening of the political unity of the Albanian people around the CPA. The leading force in the front was the working class, to which were now open wide vistas of increasing in numbers and becoming an industrial working class of a high socialist consciousness. The laboring peasantry, which had borne the brunt of battle in the National Liberation War, remained the broadest base of the Democratic Front. Partia e Punës së Shqipërisë, PPSH in Albanian, sometimes referred to as the Albanian Workers' Party. Partia e Punës së Shqipërisë, PPSH in Albanian, sometimes referred to as the Albanian Workers' Party. The Democratic Front was open to all Albanians aged 18 and older, with the exception of the former bourgeoisie, kulaks, and other perceived anti-state elements. Albanian author Anton Lagerisi writes that, without a Democratic Front card, a person cannot obtain work, get a ration book when one is required, make a purchase at government stores and so on. Its newspaper was titled Bashkimi, which with the party Daily Zeri Populat constituted the main political news organs. The front also had a semi-weekly newspaper titled Lakovimi for the Greek minority. Speech delivered on Independence Day and on the arrival of the democratic government in Tirana November 28, 1944. People of Albania, on a memorable day such as this, in 1912, after a long period of bondage, independent Albania was born. When our country was menaced from all sides by foreign enemies, when new chains of slavery were being forged for our people, old Ismail Kemali I, born in 1844, diplomat, politician, patriot and undaunted fighter for the freedom of Albania. On November 28, 1972, he hoisted the flag of independence in Vlora and led the first Albanian government. He was poisoned by the Italian imperialists in 7979. People's hero with a handful of valiant patriots hoisted the banner of freedom in Vlora, and the Albanian people paused for breath. We emerged victorious, but new cruel waves dashed over our poverty-stricken people, and that banner of freedom was violated. It was misused, and became an object of barter for the satraps of past regimes. It was used to hide the shameful deeds and robbery perpetrated upon our people. But the banner of the people, the banner of Ismail Kemali, remained unsullied in the hearts of Albanian patriots. That banner was raised high, held aloft by the steel hands of the people's fighters, and passed through storms and tempests, always defiant and unbowed. The symbol of freedom and independence today, after so much heroic fighting against fascism, the red banner of Vlora, dyed with the blood of the people's heroes fallen in this anti-fascist war, flies proudly in the skies of free Albania. 5 years have passed since the beginning of the cruel fascist slavery, and 5 times over on each November 28 the blood of the heroic sons of the people, who faced the bayonets of the occupiers and traitors, has flowed in the streets of Albanian cities. The day of the flag has become doubly sacred, the day of the independence and the union of the Albanian people. On April 7, 1939, we fell into bondage, into heavy servitude, when fascism, the greatest enemy of our people and of all mankind, invaded our country. The Great War was in the making. The great slaughter was being prepared by Hitler and Mussolini. We paid the first toll. The international outlook was gloomy. Europe was arming at a feverish pace, and not a single voice was raised in our defense save the cries of our people betrayed by the government of the time, crying out for weapons to fight the Italians. The betrayal was complete. The intriguing politicians, the speculators were riding high. They extended their hands to the occupiers who made common cause with them in order to suppress the people, to make them slaves, fodder for their guns. The fascists and the traitors worked systematically to quell any resistance, to smother all patriotic feeling, to trample underfoot the honor of our country, to obliterate our customs and language, and to colonize Albania, so that the Italians could strike out from our country at our neighbors and at the Soviet Union. But amidst the Black Terror, the great resistance was born among our people, who rose to their feet to win back the freedom which had been stolen from them. Barbarous fascism, armed to the teeth with the most modern weapons and aided by the traitors, came up against our brave fighters who had a freedom in their hearts, their iron will, and infinite self-sacrifice. The sons of the people, who felt the agonies of their homeland and who bore on their shoulders the sufferings, the hardships and the sorrows of an entire people, stood up to fight. Many of those who, in the first hours of the war, fell martyrs for this people whom they loved so much, fell with a song on their lips, happy because they knew what they were fighting for, and that with their life's blood they would raise a new Albania. This was the battle cry and the people's call to arms sounded by the vanguard. It told them that the country was threatened with death, that they must take up arms and, with merciless and unceasing war, liberate the homeland. The Albanian people heard the call of their sons. The blood flowing in the streets of towns and villages was their own blood, and so the people took up arms. Our glorious national liberation war began. It was an unequal war. We were unarmed, barefoot, and empty-bellied, but we were strong, for we were fighting for a great cause, fighting for the liberation of the people, to give them a happy life and to take our revenge on the enemy who sought to drown us in blood. We were a small people face to face with a huge beast, but we were strong, for in our hearts we nurtured a deep hatred for those who had invaded our homes and robbed us of our possessions. We took up arms and threw ourselves into the fight, certain of victory, because justice was on our side, and because in this war we were not alone. The whole of the progressive and anti-fascist world, united in a solid front, was at war against the same enemies, the enemies of mankind, Nazism and fascism. People of Albania, 3 years of armed struggle, glorious pages in the history of our country, written with the precious blood of the sons and daughters of the Albanian people. Our national liberation movement grew and gathered strength in a fierce armed struggle. In a political struggle, our enemies were strong and cunning. They resorted to terror and demagogy and exerted all their efforts to crush our resistance. The traitors to the country, Mustafa Kruja, Mehdi Frasheri, Ali Kilsire, Mithad Frasheri, Abbas Kupi, Shevket Verlisi and all the other quislings used every tactic to divide our people. Their demagogy was powerful, and at the beginning a section of the people was duped to some extent by these bandits, who were always the short-sighted instruments of our internal and external enemies. The Bali Combater, Legalitidi and all the other terrorist organizations became active weapons of the occupiers. With extraordinary ferocity, together with the Germans, they hurled themselves upon the people, killing and cutting down innocent people en masse, women, old folk and children, while they looted and raped. These murders hurled fire and venom upon our national liberation movement, upon our army. But our movement was undamaged, because it had sound foundations, because it was a people's movement, a progressive, democratic movement. Around our national liberation front rallied the honest people, the working people, the people who earned their bread with their own sweat, and not with intrigues and treachery. Our national liberation front rallied all the democratic elements, without discrimination as to political or religious tendencies, and became the sound and proper body to carry out this difficult and sacred mission. Our National Liberation Army, which grew and gathered strength in bloody battles, was the army of the people, where the peasants, workers and intellectuals, united as one, fought for a common goal, for a free Albania, for an independent Albania, for people's democracy. After 3 years of heroic efforts, after so much bloodshed, suffering and sacrifice, we emerged victorious. We smashed the German barbarians and their traitor lackeys. In the course of these 3 years of war, our National Liberation Front became a reality. The National Liberation Councils were created as organs of the war and as the foundations of state power, and these, in turn, were strengthened and became the true democratic state power of the people. This new people's power overthrew the old power, which had been the blind tool of the occupiers and the traitors. To create the front and the state power, thousands of sons of Albania fell, fighting selflessly, convinced of our people's happy future. Our movement, with its correct political platform, opened broad vistas to the people and showed them the road to victory. Our national liberation movement had as its goal the unification of the whole Albanian people. By shedding its blood, it tried to make the misguided understand that the road they were following was harming our homeland. The Anti-Fascist National Liberation Committee and the Presidium of the Anti-Fascist Council of Albania, in the call they sent out to those who still remained in the ranks of the enemy, gave still another vivid proof of the aims of our movement. After 3 years of heroic efforts, after so much bloodshed, we emerged victorious. The bloodthirsty German enemy has been driven from almost all our country. Note, Shkodra, town in northwest Albania, was liberated a day later, on November 29, 7944, and the state marked the complete liberation of Albania. The reactionary bands who committed fratricide have been smashed, and today the 28th of November is being celebrated with indescribable enthusiasm by the Albanian people, who have won their freedom with their blood. Today, to Tirana, liberated after fierce fighting from street to street and from house to house, today to the capital of free, democratic Albania, and to the midst of those heroic people who stood unflinching in the vanguard of our war, who were undaunted by the massacres perpetrated by the Germans and the traitors, which only strengthened their resolve, came the democratic government of Albania. People of Albania, our victorious war raised high the prestige of our country, and made the name of Albania and of the Albanians honored in the progressive world. Thanks to that struggle, we are spoken of with respect, for we stood and shall stand loyal to the great alliance of the anti-fascist bloc, and who have poured out our blood in torrents beside our allies in the war to save mankind from the clutches of German Nazism. Our heroic war was closely linked with that of our great allies, the Soviet Union, Britain and America, and with the war of the enslaved nations. In our struggle we had unshaken faith in victory, for we had the great support of the Anglo-Soviet American alliance. When the glorious Red Army, led by the great strategist of our time, Marshal Stalin, was ruthlessly crushing the Hitlerite hordes, liberating its territories and triumphantly marching towards the west for the decisive attack on Hitler's last citadel, our people's fighting strength was refreshed and multiplied, and their energy and confidence increased. The brilliant victories of the Red Army were also our victories, and the victories of the entire world, because they were the principal factor in the destruction of Nazism. Thanks to these victories, the national liberation wars of the enslaved peoples grew stronger. These victories of the Red Army contributed to the arrival of this day which we are now celebrating so wonderfully. Our nation, small but unbroken, expresses its boundless gratitude to the heroic peoples of the Soviet Union and to the glorious Red Army. In this great war, Britain and the United States did not yield to German Nazism. They fought and are fighting bravely for the common cause. Their land, air and sea war, which is doing so much damage to the German war machine, is an invaluable aid for our people. The opening of the Second Front and the smashing of the German resistance in France hasten the final victory. In their national liberation war, our people have had the support of the heroic struggle of the Yugoslav peoples, our neighbors and brothers. From the very first days they were occupied, threw themselves into a resolute liberation struggle. Our army and that of Yugoslavia are shedding their blood side by side on the fields of Kosova and Metohija. Our soldiers and the Yugoslav soldiers bind each other's wounds suffered in fierce battles against the same enemy, and our friendship is being consecrated in the mingling of their blood. Our brigades, which have been ordered not to let a single German escape alive from our country, are crossing into Montenegro. Note, immediately after the liberation of Albania, upon decision of the CC of the CPA and on order of the Commander-in-Chief, Comrade Enver Hoxha, the 5th and 6th Divisions of the NLA of Albania followed the Hitlerite troops into Yugoslavia, in December 7944 and January-February 7945. The Albanian fighters, together with detachments of the NLA of Yugoslavia, liberated Montenegro, Sanjak in the southern part of Bosnia and Herzegovina, where together with the Yugoslav brigades, they will put an end to the German resistance in those areas. The bonds of friendship between our people and the peoples of Yugoslavia are bonds of blood and hardships faced together. On this great festive day for our country, we send our greetings to the fraternal peoples of Yugoslavia. We have fought and bled together with the neighboring Greek people. We have bandaged each other's wounds in this common anti-fascist war, and it is our desire to be always on good terms with this generous people. With regret, we observe that the chauvinist and reactionary bands of Zervis, note, during the Second World War, he was a tool in the hands of British imperialism. A rabid chauvinist are martyring the Albanian minority, robbing them of their possessions and hounding them out of their territory. Zervis elements are crossing the border on the sly to kill or wound our partisans. We will never tolerate such acts in our country. The Greek Prime Minister, Papandreou, has presented claims to annex our regions of Gjirokastra and Kalka, or as it pleases him to call them, Northern Epirus. Such claims, naturally, do not make for good relations with our southern neighbors. Our borders are indisputable, because within them, there is nothing but our land, the land bequeathed to us by our forefathers, land on which our blood has been shed. No one will dare to touch them. We shall know how to defend them if they do. Our national liberation movement has given the Greek minority in Albania equal rights with the Albanian people. The democratic government of Albania will guarantee the Greek minority in our country the freedom and the democratic and national rights for which their sons fought heroically in the national liberation brigades. People of Albania, today another page is being opened in our history, a page which it is in our power to write, and which we shall make as glorious as our war against the occupiers. This is the battle to reconstruct Albania, restore the economy, raise the culture and education of our people, and raise their social, economic and political level. At the critical moment, our movement undertook the gigantic and unequal war and emerged victorious because our people were united as one around the National Liberation Front. Our national liberation movement will undertake the second struggle too, and will emerge victorious, because that is the dying wish of those who fell on the field of honor, because that is the entire life of the people and their future. The German Nazis and the traitors have sown disaster and sorrow in our country. Entire regions have been burned. The fields have been desolated. The economy of our country has been ruined. Thousands of families are without shelter and without food. Schools need to be opened and the people's health must be protected. We shall accomplish all these important tasks if we strengthen our state power and bring into it those who deeply feel the sufferings of the people. Therefore, the task before us is to put everything we have into our state power to make it strong, and to mobilize all the people around it so that it can accomplish these vital tasks. We must strengthen our National Liberation Front, and this, in turn, should rally round itself the entire people, whom it should nurture with our correct policy, link closely with the state power, and make conscious of the tasks ahead of them. Here too, We must understand, as we did in the war with guns, that in order to carry out these tasks, in order to guarantee the people a happier and more prosperous life, it is vital for the entire people to become involved in this great undertaking. No honest Albanian should remain outside the front. No energy should be wasted. On the occasion of the 28th of November, on the occasion of the liberation of Tirana, the Presidium of the Anti-Fascist National Liberation Council grants a general amnesty to all the members of the Bali Combater, Lega Latidi and other organizations which collaborated with the invader. Excluded from this amnesty are the war criminals, all those who killed, burned, raped, or looted the wealth of the people. This is an additional proof of the lofty aims of the national liberation movement, the movement which fought and will fight for the people, and which has the greatest justice as its principle. Let the whole of Albania become a construction site, and let old and young understand that they are not working for foreigners, but working to build their own country, for the country for which we did not spare our lives. Neither should we spare our sweat or toil. We must exert all our energies so that our army, the major factor in these victories, will be strengthened and become a modern army in the true sense of the word. It must be the true defender of the people and of their state power. In order to fulfill this main duty, it is necessary to make it a politically conscious army, for only thus will it be in a position to finish the war with the greatest success, and become a living defender of the interests of the people. People of Albania, you must gather the fruits of your heroic war yourselves, because they belong to you, and you have paid for them in blood, so that they will not be snatched from you and stolen by thieves, speculators, intriguers, and tricky politicians, by those parasites who used to live on your backs. We must close our ranks more tightly than ever. All of us must rally round the state power, round the front, round the democratic government, and thus march together towards our desired objectives, the improvement of the social and economic life of our country. Long live free democratic Albania. Long live the Albanian people. Long live the National Liberation Army. Long live our great allies, Britain, the Soviet Union and America. Long live the brotherhood of the freedom-loving Balkan peoples. Long live the heroic people of Tirana. Declaration of the Democratic Government of Albania at the second meeting of the Anti-Fascist National Liberation Council of Albania, October 23, 7944. In this great anti-fascist liberation war, in which all the progressive peoples, united in face of the danger threatening mankind, have thrown in all their energies in a common effort against the Nazi-fascist barbarians, our heroic people, with the greatest self-sacrifice, have made their contribution to the liberation of the homeland and the wiping out of the fascist plague. The Albanian people courageously undertook the most terrible, and at the same time the most glorious war ever known in our history, and have shown in deeds, which will remain as lasting monuments for the future generations of our country, that the blood of their heroic ancestors still flows in the veins of the Albanians, and that their spirit is endowed with the lofty virtues characteristic of our people. In face of the great torrent threatening to engulf our country, the people, regardless of the sufferings, hunger, burnings, and killings, embarked on the only road of salvation through which they were to smash the dreadful shackles of slavery, the road of merciless war against the occupiers and the traitors of the country. Through their war against savage and powerful enemies equipped with the most modern weapons, the Albanian people fought their way step by step to glory, to raise high the name of Albania and the Albanians, earning for our country the respect of the whole world, and through the blood of their glorious sons, the right to take their place alongside all those peoples who undertook the great task of the salvation of mankind. In the flames of this liberation war our heroic National Liberation Army was set up, the army of our invincible people, which dealt mortal blows to the occupiers and traitors and, in fighting bloody battles, armed and steeled itself with determination, discipline, and great experience. Through struggle and efforts the National Liberation Councils were set up, which became the true democratic state power of the people and which, together with our army, constituted the principal factor in our victories. Parallel with the victories of the army, the organization of our state power, too, passed from one glorious stage to another, gradually becoming perfected. Pisa, Labanat, Permet, and Berat are the four glorious stages of our war. The Great Congress of Permet, where the delegates of the Albanian people elected the Anti-Fascist National Liberation Council of Albania and vested it with legislative and executive powers, gave Albania the Anti-Fascist Committee, the principal executive and directing organ of the Anti-Fascist National Liberation Council. The second historic meeting of the Anti-Fascist National Liberation Council of Albania, held in the liberated town of Berat, gave Albania its first democratic government, the principal executive and directing organ through which the Anti-Fascist National Liberation Council fulfills its executive functions. The democratic government of Albania, conscious of the duties it has been entrusted with, will remain loyal to the decisions adopted at the Congress of Permet, will be the continuation of the Anti-Fascist Committee, and will implement and uphold all the military and political principles of the national liberation movement on a wider scale. The government, exercising its functions, declares to the entire Albanian people, 1. The democratic government of Albania will remain loyal to the decisions adopted at the Anti-Fascist National Liberation Congress of Permet and by the Anti-Fascist National Liberation Council of Albania. This government will continue in the footsteps of the Anti-Fascist Committee. 2. The objective of the government is the continuation and extension of the war, the rapid and complete liberation of Albania, and the defense of its independence. 3. The democratic government of Albania will rally all the forces of the Albanian people around the national Liberation state power, and will strengthen the power of the National Liberation Councils. 4. The democratic government of Albania, after the complete liberation of Albania, and after stabilizing the situation, will proceed to hold free and democratic elections to the Constituent Assembly, which will decide on the form of the state and formulate the founding constitution of the Albanian state. 5. The democratic government of Albania will review all the political, military, and economic agreements concluded with foreign states by the Zog regime, and will cancel all those which are to the detriment of the Albanian people and state. 6. The democratic government of Albania will guarantee and defend all the civil rights of the citizens. 7. The democratic government of Albania will try to establish closer cooperation with the great allies, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States of America, as well as with all the other members of the anti-fascist bloc. 8. The democratic government of Albania will seek recognition as the sole government of Albania from the great allies, Great Britain, the Soviet Union and the United States of America, as well as all the members of the anti-fascist bloc. On behalf of the democratic government of Albania, Prime Minister and Supreme Commander of the National Liberation Army of Albania, Colonel General Enver Hoxha. Speech to the Constituent Assembly on the presentation of the resignation of the government. Date, January 12, 1946. Members of the Constituent Assembly, on October 22, 1944, in Brat, the anti-fascist National Liberation Council of Albania entrusted me with the great honor of heading the first democratic government of Albania, which had the attributes of a provisional government, responsible to the people for the accomplishment of the heavy tasks assigned to it and loyal to the decisions of Albania. The government acted in the most democratic way for the election of the Constituent Assembly of the Albanian people. The December 2, 7,945 elections were democratic, secret, free, equal and direct. Despite the maneuvering of the British and U.S. imperialists, and the efforts of internal reaction, 90% of the voters went to the polls, and 93% of them voted for the candidates of the Democratic Front. Today I consider it my duty to present to this sovereign assembly, which represents the will of our entire people, the resignation of the government I have the honor of leading. I am confident that the democratic government of Albania has carried out with honor, loyalty, and success the tasks which were laid down before it. Under its direction, the heroic war of our people against the occupiers was continued with the utmost intensity, and our beloved country was liberated. Under its leadership the people's power was consolidated, and order and tranquility were established. The deplorable economic conditions of our country which had emerged from a devastating war were improved. Part of what the enemy had destroyed was reconstructed. Major social and economic reforms were implemented for the benefit of the laboring people. Public education was restored and improved, and our heroic army, the invincible defender of the people's interests, and of Albania's independence and sovereignty, was strengthened, and its modernization begun. Through its just and wise policy, the democratic government of Albania ensured for our people the sound and sincere friendship of the democratic peoples, their allies and friends, and consolidated the international position of Albania by gaining recognition from many powerful and progressive European states. The democratic government of Albania works successfully to make our small country an important factor for fraternity and peace in the Balkans and Europe. We pledged to our people that we would carry out the duty with which you charged us at the most critical moment. It is now up to you to judge our actions and adopt the necessary decisions in the interest of the homeland, along with the presentation of the resignation of the government. Note: at the proposal made by a group of deputies and after its unanimous approval by the Constituent Assembly, Comrade Enver Hoxha was charged to form the first government of the People's Republic of Albania. I have the great honor to thank the Anti-Fascist Council of Albania, all state functionaries and the entire Albanian people for the great aid they have rendered to the government in the exercise of its functions, and we pledge to our people that we shall remain their invincible soldiers, loyal to the death to their sacred cause. Long live the Albanian people. Speech delivered at the plenary session of the Paris Peace Conference. Date, August 21, 1946. Mr. Chairman, Messrs. Delegates, on behalf of the Albanian people and their government, I greet the Paris Conference, wishing it full success in its noble work. I feel it my duty also to greet the French government and the heroic French people, and to thank them for their traditional hospitality, following this incomparably savage war, during which the civilized nations, their very existence menaced by German Nazism and Italian fascism, threw themselves into the terrible conflict with the single slogan, victory or death. We have arrived at this high-level conference, which must establish the lasting peace which is so great, why desired. The civilized nations waged a liberation war, and now they are waiting anxiously for this peace to be established in accordance with the principles and ideals for which millions of people gave their lives. In order to ensure mankind a happier future and genuine justice, the Paris Conference has been convened to work out the peace treaties between the former Allied countries and the satellites of Germany, and to put an end to aggression by ensuring sound relations among the peace-loving peoples, eager for freedom, justice, and democracy. To this end, Albania, too, has been invited to put forward its point of view in relation to the peace treaty with Italy. However, Albania considers that the decision not to invite it as a participant in this conference was unjust. The Albanian people were the first to take up arms against the Italian fascists, who had brought the torch to set Europe ablaze, and they ceased their fight only when Hitlerite Germany was defeated. They deserve greater justice. The Albanian people, loyal to their fighting traditions for freedom and independence, and loyal to the end to the Allied cause, from April 7, 1939 till the day of victory, never shirked any sacrifice. Albania rendered a major and unstinting contribution in bloodshed for the common cause. Albania's fight earned it the right to participate in this conference, with the same title and same rights as those of the 21 victorious nations. The small Albanian nation, alone and defenseless, was the first victim of Italian aggression. The fascist Italy of Mussolini attacked our country on April 7, 1939, thus crowning the predatory policy of expansion it had obstinately pursued against our country for half a century. The civilized world recalls that Black Friday in the year 1939, when 173 warships moved into our ports, 600 bombers roared in our skies, and over 50,000 soldiers armed to the teeth hurled themselves like wolves on our small but valiant people. The Italian fascists wanted to capture us, to crush us, to rob us forever of our freedom and independence and enslave us. But Mussolini's fascists were wrong in their reckoning. The Albanians are not the kind of people who endure slavery. Our history is proof of this. Our mountains and forests are filled with the echoes of the heroic struggles of our ancestors, who fought fiercely for centuries against their oppressors. In 1939, while Europe stood by in silence, our country's sons were falling on the field of honor for a just cause, which, before long, would become the cause of all mankind. The Italian fascists might invade our country, but they could never crush us. Our bones were tempered by the suffering that had befallen our country over the centuries. Completely alone, facing a ruthless enemy, we have kept our head erect in the storm, and have declared war without quarter on the enemy. Our mountains, plains and valleys, our cities and villages testify to the heroic struggle of my people, who are jealous of their independence and freedom, and would rather die arms in hand than bow their heads in servitude. 15,000 Albanian volunteers fought heroically in Durrës, Vlora, Saranda, and Shëngjin as well as in the interior of the country, against the hated occupier. But what could this small nation do, with so few arms and so little ammunition, against such an enemy? But, although the country was occupied, our people never considered themselves defeated. With heads held high and unshakable will, we followed the path of suffering and glory. We were sure of victory, for our cause was just. Following the bloody days of April, the resistance continued and grew. 3,000 armed Albanians took to the mountains, our people's eternal strongholds. The whole people knew the perils and sacrifices of the heroic deed they were undertaking, but at the same time they also knew that their destiny, their very existence, would be decided in those battles. In the towns, bloody skirmishes against the occupiers followed hard one on another. Our men fell under the bullets of the enemy's machine guns as it tried to break our resistance. From the towns and villages, from the streets and alleys, the Albanian partisans hurled themselves on the enemy to sabotage its military machine, to attack roads, transport, and bridges, blow up munitions depots and to kill spies, officers, and collaborators. It was a ruthless war. The Italians responded with a reign of terror in the towns and villages. The prisons were filled with patriots, dozens of Albanians were hanged and thousands more were exiled to the death islands of Lipari, Ventradin 1, and elsewhere. But all this terror, these hangings and shootings, merely increased our people's hatred for the Italian fascists and incited them to fight. When the Italians attacked Greece, the daring and powerful armed actions of the Albanians were a great assistance to the Greek people who were suffering the same fate as ours. We were bound to each other by the same misfortune, caused by our common enemy. Along the roads of Durrës, Tirana, and Gjirokastra, the Albanian partisans attacked Italian military convoys heading for the Greek front. Clearly seeing the danger threatening them, the Italians and the Albanian quislings redoubled their efforts and stepped up their terror. The mountains were full of partisans, organized in regular formations, who made incessant attacks on the enemy. In reprisal, hundreds of villages were burned, but we defended the liberated territory inch by inch. The Italians were obliged to take refuge in the towns, because the mountains were not so good for their health. The Quisling governments, under Italian domination, fell and were replaced every 10 months. The Albanian people made life impossible for both them and their bosses. This showed the great gulf which separated the Quislings from the heroic Albanian people. Following the capitulation of Italy and the occupation of the country by German troops who came from Greece, the Albanian people closed their ranks still tighter because they knew they had to deal with another ferocious, bloodthirsty enemy. As soon as they entered Albania, the Germans were attacked by our partisan formations along the Parrot-Korka highway. Dozens of trucks were set on fire, and hundreds of Germans were killed. As a reprisal, the Germans razed the village of Brova, and murdered everyone in it, women, men, and children. With the aim of annihilating us, the Germans mounted two great offensives. 4 German Alpine divisions, expert at fighting partisans, were thrown in against us. We were in the middle of winter, without food, without boots, but the partisans fought bravely and emerged victorious. When the British and the Americans, our allies, landed in France, we were fighting furiously against 4 German divisions. We felt proud, in this bloody clash, to be doing our duty towards the Allies and the friendly French people. The war of the Albanian people against the Germans was crowned with the heroic Battle of Tirana, where we fought day and night for 19 days on end, from street to street, from house to house, liberating every inch of our capital, sacrificing our best fighters, but killing thousands of Germans. The remnants of the German army tried to get through to help their besieged garrison in Tirana, but they were wiped out at Kraba Pass. The National Liberation Army had received from our general staff a firm order not to let the Germans cross Albania's borders, but to annihilate them on Albanian territory. This was how we understood the great anti-fascist alliance. This was how we understood loyalty towards the Allied cause. The pursuit of the German troops outside our borders, in the Yugoslav territory of Montenegro, Sanjak, and Herzegovina, is another clear proof for those who really want to know and have the heart to feel how great the sacrifices of our small nation were. For more than 5 years the Albanian people fought the Italian and German fascist occupiers as well as their Albanian lackeys. Organized in the National Liberation Front, they fought an unequal but decisive war, facing hunger and cold, but armed with courage and unshakable confidence in their own forces and in those of the Allies. They marched forward boldly towards their objective, the liberation of Albania and the destruction of fascism. Albania became a bastion of the struggle for freedom and independence. Our liberation war was soon recognized abroad. In December 1942, Messrs. Eden.Hull and Molotov sent their congratulations to the Albanian people for their resistance, which ensured their independence, and contributed to the common struggle. The National Liberation Army, which arose from the first partisan units, was organized and consolidated through fierce battles, and became a strong and valiant army. It crushed the enemy's military machine and seized the weapons, with which it triumphed. It successfully coped with the great offensives organized by the Italians and the Germans, who tried to crush our national liberation war. The enemy suffered heavy losses during these offensives, whereas our army emerged ever stronger and more tempered. Our war was essentially a people's war, inseparable from the people. It was their sole means of salvation. The fascist and Nazi occupiers resorted to the blackest terror in order to alienate the people from the just liberation war. Thousands of people were murdered or hanged in the towns and villages. More than 300 were gunned down in broad daylight in Korka, Tirana and Vlora. During the protest demonstrations against the occupation, 10,000 Albanians were thrown into Albanian prisons, into the concentration camps of Porto Romano, Borj, Brl, Kavaja and Pristina, as well as the death camps in Germany. Because of their anti-fascist sentiments and activities, they burned down and drowned in blood entire towns, such as Leskovic, Pogradec, Saranda and Permit, and whole regions, such as Malakastra, Kurvalesh, Pisa and Skrapar, were laid waste and suffered savage reprisals at the hands of the fascist and Nazi soldiers. But, despite these things, the Albanian people themselves, with their incessant war, and with great sacrifices, liberated the whole of their country with their own forces. The following figures clearly show the size of our resistance on the eve of the liberation of Albania. Our National Liberation Army had 70,000 fighters in its ranks, including 6,000 women. Italy was obliged to maintain over 100,000 soldiers in Albania, and Germany over 70,000 to counter our resistance forces. The sacrifices of our people were very great. Out of a population of 1 million, 28,000 were killed, 12,600 wounded, 10,000 were made political prisoners in Italy and Germany, and 35,000 made to do forced labor. Of the 2,500 towns and villages of Albania, 850 were ruined or razed to the ground. All the communications, all the ports, mines and electric power installations were destroyed. Our agriculture and livestock were plundered, and our entire national economy was wrecked. On the other side, the enemy suffered these losses. 53,639 Italians and Germans were killed, wounded or taken prisoner. About 100 tanks and armored cars knocked out. 1,334 artillery pieces and mortars. 1,934 trucks and 2,855 machine guns captured or destroyed. Not to mention the rifles, munitions, and stores destroyed or captured. The Allies appreciated our contribution to the common cause. In June 1943, they sent military liaison missions to the General Staff of our National Liberation Army, and dropped supplies by parachute. I want to mention here some of the heads of these missions: the Englishman Major Bill McLean, Lieutenant Colonel Palmer, and General Davies, the American Captain Thomas Stephen, and the Russian Major Ivanov. From 1944 an Albanian military mission was accredited at the Allied Mediterranean High Command in Italy. The Allied leaders have often acknowledged our people's contribution to the common cause. Mr. Winston Churchill, answering a question in the House of Commons on November 4, 1943, declared, "Thousands of Albanians are fighting in their mountains for the freedom and independence of their country and, according to the reports of the British military mission in Albania, they are carrying out brilliant actions." Mr. Cordell Hull, on the occasion of Albanian National Day, November 28, 1943, in a letter to Mr. Charles Hard, ex-ambassador of the United States of America to Albania, and president of the Friends of Albania Association, wrote, "The government and the people of the United States have always been aware of the struggle of the Albanian people to safeguard the integrity and independence of their own country. We have followed closely, with sympathy and admiration, their resistance against fascist Italy, as well as their patriotic determination to defend their national sovereignty. Today these valiant fighters are continuing their war, fighting the Nazi enemy, like all those who love freedom, as we do ourselves." On November 28, 1912 the Albanians proclaimed their independence. Today, on the anniversary of this date, they could hope for the complete fulfillment of their great objective. Although the Albanians do not have a government abroad to express their national aspirations, we see in their national will the ideals and principles which inspire us and our allies, as well as the desire to carry on the war until Nazism is totally wiped out. Mr. Hull's successor, Mr. Edward Stettinius, on May 22, 1945, sent me the following message: "I am well aware of the incessant war the Albanian people have waged against the aggressor, and I fully appreciate the sacrifices they have made to achieve the liberation of their country, and their contribution to the attainment of the ultimate victory against the common enemy. I want to assure you of the sympathy and friendship the people of the United States cherish for Albania and its people, and I know that in the future Albania will make the same important contribution to the cause of peace as it has made to the achievement of victory. The General Commander of the Allied Forces in the Mediterranean, Maitland Wilson, wrote me these words on the October 12, 1944. I have watched with admiration the way your National Liberation Army has fulfilled its tasks in its brilliant attacks on our common enemy, for our common goal. I could, gentlemen, also cite a great number of documents demonstrating how much our efforts were appreciated by the Allies, but the brave deeds of our people do not need documents. They speak for themselves. When the airplane in which they were traveling was damaged, 13 American women were obliged to land in German-occupied territory. Those women let the whole world know about the sacrifices and selflessness of the Albanian partisans who risked certain death to save them from the Germans' clutches, as the New Zealand and Australian airmen whom our men rescued from the German shells were leaving our staff headquarters. They shook hands with me and said, "Our wives and children will be grateful to you for saving our lives," but our partisans were merely doing their duty by their comrades in arms and allies, with the aim of distorting history and denying facts that are as plain as day. Great efforts are being made to prevent those who fought heroically for the common cause from being treated equally. A great deal has been said at this high-level conference about defending the interests of the small nations, but in reality the opposite has occurred as far as our people are concerned. The Albanian people, few in number but mighty in terms of the deeds they have done, should have been present now, at this conference, with the same rights as the other victorious nations, rights for which they have paid very dear. The Albanian people feel offended at being put on the same plane as Austria, which did not fire a single shot against the Germans, but on the contrary, sent its soldiers to murder our women and children, and burn out towns and villages. In collaboration with the Germans, no one can deny the Albanian people's loyalty to the Allies in the great anti-fascist cause. All those who try to prove the contrary, using false arguments, will make themselves ridiculous and suffer a great defeat. The Albanian people come proudly to this peace conference convinced that they have completely fulfilled their duty as allies. Albania appears here to claim its right to reparations and to demand justice from Italy, which set it ablaze and drowned it in blood, and to dictate its will as a victor, so that Italy may no longer represent a threat to peace in the world, or to the independence and sovereignty of my country. However, before stating the viewpoint of my country on this question, I feel it my duty to answer the false accusations of Mr. Tsalgaris II, the head of the Greek delegation, accusations and claims that he has formulated against Albania at various earlier sessions of this conference. Mr. Tsalgaris tries to prove that Albania is not an allied country, that Albania attacked Greece, and consequently, is in a state of war with Greece. On the other hand, Mr. Tsalgaris lays claim to South Albania, pretending that it is Greek territory and belongs by right to Greece. On the question of whether Albania is an allied country and whether it has fully deserved this title, Mr. Tsalgaris has our reply in the words I have just spoken. The Albanian people contemptuously reject the vile accusations of the Greek delegate, who labels my country an aggressor. The Albanian people have never attacked the honest Greek people, and have never declared war on them. On the contrary, they sympathized with their cause, which was also the cause of the Albanian people, since both nations have suffered the same fate and had to deal with the same enemy. The Albanian people demonstrated, not only during the anti-fascist war, but also during the First World War, their determination to fight Italian imperialism, which had its eye on our land and resources. Between the Albanian people and the Italian fascists, a terrible and merciless war was waged. That is why Mr. Tsalgaris will not succeed in convincing anybody, even the stupid, with his famous arguments. Mr. Tsalgaris should demand a settlement of accounts from fascist Italy for its disgraceful attack against his country, and not from us. He should call to account the war criminal Victor Emmanuel, not the Albanian people, who were invaded by the same enemy as Greece, and who, like the Greek people, fought furiously for their independence and sovereignty. It would be ridiculous to think that, by a paltry decree, Victor Emmanuel, King of Italy, could lay the blame on the Albanian people who waged a merciless war against Italy right from the first days of the occupation, and who even made an attempt against the king's life during his only visit to Albania, in May, 1941. Mr. Tsalgaris uses a declaration of war on the part of the Albanian Quisling Verlisi as an argument to defend his thesis. The Albanian people lumped the occupiers and Quislings together, and made no distinction between them. The Albanian Quislings, like all the other Quislings of Europe, have nothing in common with our people. They were the filthiest enemies of the people and, as such, have been fought consistently. The Albanian Quislings were not able to muster more than a few weak battalions against the Liberation Army and the Allies, whereas the Albanian people rose as one man against the oppressor and the traitors. That is the difference between our people and the Quislings. Would Mr. Tsalgaris like to know in addition what the Albanian people did with those Quislings? Just this: they wiped them out, all of them, and thus they paid with their lives for the crimes they committed. And if he wants to know more about the fate of their associates in the war, who fled with the German troops, he should know that these criminals may be found in the best hotels in Rome, the city from which the planes which so cravenly bombed Albanian and Greek women and children took off. I would like to ask Mr. Tsaldaris, why does he not mention the Quislings of Europe who so gravely damaged the Allied cause, and in particular, those Quislings who, after having committed horrible crimes, now walk freely in the streets? Why is it that Mr. Tsaldaris dare not confuse the other European Quislings with their respective nations? I would like to remind you that during the Italian-Greek War, some hundreds Albanian soldiers, forced into service by the Italians, rose against them and made common cause with the Greek people. Some deserted and went over to the Greek troops to fight alongside them, but they were treated as prisoners of war and sent to Crete, where during the German landing, they fought valiantly beside the British soldiers. Some joined the Albanian partisans, while others were disarmed by the Italians, withdrawn from the front, confined to the Shijak concentration camp, and court-martialed for high treason. On December 22, 1940, the Reuters news agency sent out the following item from Monastir. The Albanian soldiers, forcibly conscripted into the Italian army, yesterday rebelled in a sector of the Italian rail lines, causing the enemy heavy losses before being captured. Some have taken to the hills, and are continuing to offer resistance. On December 4, 1940, the Anadolu news agency reported from Athens that an Italian general taken prisoner by the Greeks has declared that the Italian army is suffering heavy losses because of the defection of the Albanians. Mussolini himself, in a letter to Hitler on November 22, 1940, tried to justify the Italian losses in the same way. Here's what Badoglio says in his memoirs: "The campaign has begun. The entire world knows of its progress. The Greek troops in Epirus are resisting valiantly on the Calamus River, while the Albanian bands and troops which were part of our divisions have either betrayed us, sabotaging our operations, or have gone over to the Greeks." The newspaper Le Figaro in its issue number 588 of July 4, 1946, referring to the Italian-Greek War, writes, "The Albanian partisan detachments, for their part, attacked Italian convoys and troops or the roads leading to the front." On October 26, 1940, the BBC broadcast, "We are informed from Albania that Albanian partisan units, operating behind the Italian lines, are cutting and sabotaging lines of communication, sowing terror among cut-off Italian detachments. Armed groups have succeeded in entering the capital and have posted proclamations on all the government buildings, and even on the palace of the Italian government, calling on the Italians to get out of Albania." Likewise on January 4, 1941, the BBC broadcast, "In military circles it is pointed out that the Albanians are giving the Greeks great aid against the Italians, but along with his lying accusations against the Albanian people, perhaps Mr. Tsaldaris should give us here some explanation of these questions. Does he also consider as aggressors, as he does Albania, the various nations of Europe, whose Quislings not only sent battalions but even organized entire expeditions against the heroic Red Army, which was an example of heroism and valor to all nations and, at the same time, their surest support? It is difficult for him to answer this question. Does Mr. Tsaldaris perhaps consider France, from which Hitler intended to launch his offensive against England, to be an aggressor country? He will find it difficult to answer this question too. Mr. Tsaldaris thinks that he can say what he likes against tiny Albania, but he is mistaken. His worthless arguments will not hold water. No, the Albanian people have never been and never will be aggressors, and do not pose any threat to the Greek people. As Mr. Tsaldaris claims the attacks on our country by the chief Greek delegate and his claims that it is we who are causing trouble remind us of one of La Fontaine's fables. We have always lived in harmony with the Greek people, with whom we fought shoulder to shoulder against the Italian and German fascist occupiers. During our anti-fascist war, the Albanian people established links of sincere friendship with their neighbors, the Yugoslav and Greek peoples. In the light of these facts, the Greek accusations are seen for what they really are, lies devoid of any foundation. But has Mr. Tsaldaris so quickly forgotten the fact that the Greek Quislings, together with the Germans, often fought against the Albanians, and are responsible for 1,000 atrocities? Here are some facts. On September 8, 1943, the day of Italy's capitulation, the Germans, coming from the Sajata region and guided by a Zervis captain named Vitos, entered Knispel and burnt down more than 50 houses. During the great 1943-1944 winter offensive launched by the Germans against our National Liberation Army, the German troops, together with Zervist bands, came to Albania from Greece, and set fire to the Zagorje and Pagan regions. Other Zervist bands, together with the Germans, fought against the Albanian partisans in January, 1944, and set fire to the villages of Crane and Dermish, as well as the houses of all the partisans from the Greek minority of Dropel, while in February, 1944, these bands burned down the village of Drovjan. During the other large-scale offensive unleashed by the Germans in June, 1944, Zervist forces again came, together with the German troops from Greece, crossing the border at Vojtina, and set fire to everything in the Zagorje region they had left the first time. Each time the Germans came from Greece to attack the forces of the National Liberation Army, their main support was the armed bands of the Greek Quisling. General Napoleon Zervis, the Greek delegation has claimed that the present Albanian government is pursuing a policy of denationalizing the Greek minority in Albania. Gentlemen, the Greek minority in Albania, consisting of 35,000 people, fought shoulder to shoulder with all the Albanian people against the fascist and Nazi occupiers, and against the Albanian and Greek Quislings. Today in the People's Republic of Albania it enjoys equal rights. with the Albanian population. It has 79 Greek language schools, 1 Greek language secondary school, has its own autonomous local administration, just like the Albanian population, and sends representatives to the People's Assembly. There are also citizens of the Greek minority in the army and the government. On the other hand, I do not know if the honorable delegates are aware of the terror exercised against the Albanian minority in Greece. Of the 60,000 Albanians left in Greece according to the Treaty of London, from 1913 to 1923, 35,000 Albanians were forcibly transferred to Turkey as Turkish subjects in exchange for Greeks from Asia Minor. Contrary to the solemn pledges made by Greece, the Greek governments have always pursued a policy of exterminating the Albanian minority in Greece, and have never recognized that it had any rights. In June 1944 and March 1945, the armed bands of the Quisling General Napoleon Service tried to wipe out the remaining Albanians. They set their villages on fire, plundered their property, and killed thousands of men and women, old people and children. More than 20,000 Albanians who managed to escape fled to Albania where, although they are assisted by the Albanian government and people, they live in great poverty. But the real aim of all these allegations by the Greek delegate is to take 2 regions from Albania, those of Korça and Gjirokastra, which have always been among the most ardent centers of Albanian patriotism, both during the long Turkish occupation and during the National Liberation War against the Italian and German occupiers. These aims reflect the old policy of the protagonists of the Megal Idea 3, that is to say, Greek imperialist expansion over the entire Balkan region, an idea which has also germinated in the heads of the present Greek rulers. In fact, these people, with their claims on Albania, their daily provocations on our borders, and their intrigues, like the proposal Mr. Tsalgaris made to the Yugoslav delegate that Albania be partitioned between Yugoslavia and Greece for, are trying to disturb the peace in the Balkans. Gentlemen, we consider it to be out of place and unacceptable for this conference to examine the question of the territorial integrity of Albania. The Albanian people, few in number, but great in the sacrifices they made for the common cause, are not here to discuss the borders, but to express and demand their rights. We solemnly declare that within our present borders there is not 1 inch of foreign soil, and that we will never permit anyone to encroach upon them, for to us they are sacred. Albania and the peace treaty with Italy. Honorable delegates, Italy is fully responsible for the losses and damage caused to the Albanian people during this war. The capitulation of September 8, 1943, put an end to the aggression and infamy of fascist Italy, but we demand, in the name of the thousands who have fallen, and because of the misfortunes inflicted on our country by Italy, that the peace treaty put an end, once and for all, to the aggressive and imperialist policy of Italy. Albania has suffered much at the hands of fascist Italy, but it has also suffered at the hands of pre-fascist Italy, of so-called democratic Italy, and many signs and expressions of the present Italian government warn of the continuation of the same Italian policy towards Albania, that is to say, a policy of domination and occupation. Present-day Italy is sheltering all the Albanian war criminals who managed to escape their just punishment by the people. There they have found an appropriate field for their propaganda and plots against new democratic Albania. The Italian war criminals, responsible for the aggression against Albania and the countless sufferings they caused the Albanian people, are at large, and even filling important posts. In March 1946, at Bari, the Italian fascists killed an Albanian sergeant from the Albanian military mission attached to the Allied Mediterranean High Command. In speeches made during the election campaign last spring, statesmen of the present Italian government expressed greedy intentions towards Albania's independence, and even here, among the members of the Italian delegation, there are men who were Mussolini's faithful agents in imposing Italy's will on Albania, in occupying and martyring our nation. The Albanian delegation has carefully studied the draft peace treaty with Italy, and expresses its gratitude to the Council of Foreign Ministers which, during the elaboration of this treaty, has not passed over Albania's interests in silence. Nevertheless, it takes the liberty today of making some suggestions about this treaty, reserving the right to express its views in detail before the competent commissions on specific questions whenever it sees fit. Albania demands that the peace treaty give it strong guarantees avoiding any future occurrence of Italian imperialist policy of aggression towards Albania, depriving Italy of any possibility of repeating the past, both that of the period before April 7, 1939 and after, and of presenting claims of any kind against Albania. For this reason the Albanian delegation takes the liberty of suggesting some improvements. 1. The Albanian delegation estimates that the military forces land, sea and air permitted to Italy allow it to threaten the peace and security of its neighbors in the Balkan countries. Albania is of the opinion that these forces should be further reduced so as to make it impossible for Italy to endanger peace, thus permitting us to live and work in security. 2. The Albanian delegation wishes to make an observation about a very important clause in this treaty, which is closely connected with the economic development of Albania. I'm referring to the section on reparations for war damage. The Council of Foreign Ministers has left it to the conference to decide on the reparation demands presented by France, Yugoslavia, Greece, Albania and Ethiopia. In his speech, Signor de Gasperi V, although somewhat hesitantly, tried to absolve his country from the just obligations it has incurred from fascism through its criminal aggression. Gentlemen, for 54 months on end, the Italian occupiers, fully aware of their actions and pursuing well-determined aims, plundered our land and subsoil resources, our agriculture and livestock, reduced our cities and villages to ashes in order to alienate the people from their just liberation cause, and transformed our peaceful country into a battlefield, thus causing incalculable damage to our national economy. Thousands of patriots were killed, tortured, jailed or confined in concentration camps, plunging thousands of mothers, wives and children into mourning. Italy is responsible to Albania for losses and damages amounting to a sum of 3,544,232,626 gold francs. The Albanian delegation will present its reparation demands in detail, as well as the necessary amendments to the treaty, but as of now, it demands, as an indisputable right, that the peace treaty define the sum which Italy should pay to Albania as well as the conditions of payment. 3. From what has been said, it is clear that the peace treaty with Italy is of particular importance to Albania. There are also other important points, which I do not want to elaborate on here, such as the articles on war criminals, on the restitution of stolen property, on the property of the citizens of the Allied nations in Italy, besides some details, which are, nevertheless, not unimportant, and which directly concern our country. This treaty provided Albania with rights and obligations of great importance. They are closely connected with its independence, its sovereignty and territorial integrity, and its economic and political future. Nevertheless, the Albanian delegation is forced to observe that, despite all that has been said already and despite the fact that Albania, through its contribution to the common war, has aligned itself, body and soul, with the victorious Allied nations, the peace treaty with Italy in the draft form presented to us today does not guarantee Albania all the rights it is properly entitled to. Is this not a legal paradox? And does not permit it to sign this treaty as a contracting party, because it is not considered as an associated power. The Albanian delegation expressed the hope that the conference will eventually accept the following amendment, to be numbered Article 26A in Part 11, Section V, or added to the foreword, which would eliminate a series of misunderstandings and a source of continuous interventions on the part of our delegation. The amendment we suggest is as follows. Article 26A in the implementation of this treaty, Albania is considered as an associated power. I want to emphasize that the Albanian delegation reserves the right to expound its views to the plenary session of the conference, as well as to the competent commissions, whenever it sees fit to intervene on the question of the peace treaty with Italy. The Albanian delegation feels duty-bound to present its just demands towards Italy so that the latter ceases to pose a continuous threat to small, peace-loving Albania, pays compensation for the damage it has caused, returns everything it has taken by force, and hands over the Albanian and foreign war criminals who have found asylum in Italy and are wanted by the Albanian government. The People's Republic of Albania will be happy to maintain normal relations with a new and genuinely democratic Italy, which honors its international obligations, keeps within its natural borders, and respects those of others, an Italy that is not a lair of neo-fascists and war criminals of all countries, or a new hotbed of aggression, but is disposed to cooperate with other democratic countries for peace and collective security. Albania has spared nothing for the common victory. It is also determined that, side by side with its wartime allies and with all the democratic countries, it will make its contribution to the establishment of a just peace and collective security. The Albanian delegation will be happy if this modest contribution to the present conference helps in carrying out this difficult task. Speech delivered to the People's Assembly on the opening of the third regular session of the One Saint Legislature July 72, 7,947. Comrade deputies, in the name of the government and on my own behalf I convey our greetings and heartily wish you success in the proceedings of this important parliamentary session. As you know, in the present session of the People's Assembly, the government is presenting you with a number of important draft laws dealing with all the economic, social and cultural activity of our country. In the first place, the draft law on the financial budget for the current year 1947, the general state plan for 1947, and many others. Of course, these draft laws call for the greatest attention and speedy approval by the People's Assembly. Before the proceedings of the session begin, I wish, on my behalf and in the name of the government I have the honor ahead, to explain to the representatives of the people in the Assembly our government's policy on the work of building our country in all fields of economic, social, cultural and other activity, on the achievement of this important work in the past and in the immediate future, on the clear perspective our people should have, and on the important tasks facing the organs of state power and all our people, which should be carried out as well and quickly as possible, for on this depends our advance towards building socialism in our country, which means building a prosperous, happy life full of freedom and dignity for the working people of Albania. Power lies firmly in the hands of the people, as a result of the heroic struggle for liberation and our great people's revolution. This is the guarantee for the building of a happy future for our people. It was for this that the broad masses of the Albanian people fought. It was for this that the workers, peasants and patriotic intellectuals of Albania fought, united as one. This firm alliance was formed in the National Liberation War, and its primary result, the seizure of power by the people, was also achieved through the National Liberation War. Preserving and consolidating daily these two results of the war, our people and their government forged ahead to realize and further develop their program. the basic principles of which were fixed by the people from the time when they took to the mountains and fought rifle in hand against fascism and the traitors to the country. The question of the transition of power into the hands of the people is the most important question, and this will solve correctly and well all the problems of our country. The people and all our cadres should understand this well. Here too lies the reason that the fascist aggressors provoked this great Holocaust. Their aim was to establish everywhere the fascist dictatorship, the most ruthless dictatorship of capital, in order to suppress all freedom, to oppress the peoples and enslave them forever, so that the monopoly trusts would be victorious. The question of state power is also an object of concern to imperialism and world reaction. They are seeking to seize power from the hands of the people who have already succeeded in assuming power, and to replace it with a formal democratic power which would not be in the hands of the people but in the hands of a minority of individuals allegedly better qualified, and able to protect and control the interests of the people better than the people themselves. This was the objective of the Albanian traitors of the final hour, to whom I will refer later on. All their efforts were directed towards overthrowing the people's state power and, using the terms of a false and formal democracy, they sought to replace the will of the people with the hateful arbitrary power of the beys, big landowners and rich merchants, all in the service of foreign reaction. The people should never forget for a moment the question of state power. They should be on their guard and hold it firmly in their hands, improving and consolidating it. With the establishment of our people's state power, we began immediately after the liberation of Albania to take all the necessary measures to build a country devastated by the war, to nationalize all the property that had been plundered from the people, to nationalize all the factories and mines, which served the rich in order to work the working people to death, and to compel all the speculators to give back to the people everything they had extorted from them. And we began to set up a new economy on a new basis. There is no need for me to repeat here what you all have seen and experienced yourselves, to speak of the great enthusiasm of the people for the adoption of these initial measures, their great drive, self-denial and heroism, and their all-out mobilization for the reconstruction of the country. Roads and bridges were repaired, and factories destroyed during the war were rebuilt. The Kuchova and Podo soil fields, the copper and chromium mines were reconstructed, the houses burnt down during the war were rebuilt, and life began to take its normal course. Through these important measures we set up the state sector of the economy which became stronger all the time, and today we may say that we have a large state sector, which is the sector of socialist production. At the same time, along with the state sector, we created a network of various cooperatives which are continually developing and exercising control and discipline over the private sector. This control and discipline do not limit production and the development of economy in general, but check speculation, anarchy and all those things that impede the general development of the economy of our country. It is clear, and we could say that, we have been able to solve the economic problems and to strengthen our economy much better than the former regimes. We have accomplished this within a relatively short time and under very difficult situations caused by the war. We have achieved important successes in all fields of the activity of our state. The sectors of industry which had been destroyed have been all re-established and are operating at full capacity, producing more than before. For instance, the production of crude oil is 161.10/0/1938 production, 463.20/0/1945 production, and 217.30/0 that of 1946. The production of refined bitumen is 162.8% over 1938 production, 1097% over 1945. And 155.60/0/1946. The production of leather is 9,000/0/1938 production, 2,600% over 1945, and 4,000/0/1946. That of cement is 115.5% above 1938 production, 588% over 1945, 231% over 1946. That of timber is 8,330/0, 257%, 261%. The handicraft industry has been re-established and encouraged. All the bridges destroyed during the war, totaling a length of 5,547 meters, have been rebuilt. New bridges totaling 240 meters have been constructed. All the wharves of our seaports destroyed during the war have been rebuilt. 2,000 kilometers of the road network have been improved and 202 kilometers of new roads have been built, including the Kukus-Pashkopia road built by the youth. 7,852 houses burnt down during the war have been rebuilt, and the state has built 530 new school buildings. Telecommunication lines have been repaired and new lines set up. All the telegraph and telephone stations have been rebuilt. Education and culture have made great progress in our country. Suffice it for me to draw some comparisons with the pre-war state of education. During the 1938-39 school year our country had 643 primary schools attended by 52,024 pupils, whereas today, during the 1946-47 school year, we have 609 primary schools attended by 134,524 pupils. Compulsory school attendance throughout Albania has been achieved 870/0. Note, According to the law on compulsory primary education, which came into effect in August 7946, primary education became compulsory for all children over 7 years of age. Today we have 34 upper elementary and 10 secondary schools which are attended by thousands and thousands of our boys and girls. I don't intend to speak here about the number of preschool institutions, or schools for adult education, where more than 26,000 people are taught in over 1,000 classes. The campaign against illiteracy is making rapid progress. In order to wipe out illiteracy in Albania, the government, with the aid of the entire Democratic Front, will try its utmost to have about 60,000 people learn to read and write every year. Thus, within a few years illiteracy in Albania will have been wiped out. Hundreds of students attend courses in various branches of the Teacher Training Institute which has been opened this year in Tirana. Hundreds of students are attending university in the Soviet Union, Bulgaria and elsewhere, and hundreds of others will be sent abroad on state scholarships to study science in various universities. The number of public libraries in our country is increasing, as well as the number of books they contain. The cinema, theater, music and sports are developing rapidly in a correct way. One of the principal problems which our people's state power had to solve was that of land reform. The peasants had to be given the land, because it belonged to them. It was their own, for they tilled it, and the land reform has been completed. The implementation of the land reform laws totally changed the ratio of ownership of land, which now appears as follows. Land owned by the state has been reduced from 18.71% to 5.03/0. Land owned by religious communities has been reduced from 1.26% to 0.20%. Large and medium estates have been reduced from 52.43% to 16.38%. Land belonging to small owners has increased from 28.07% to 43.17%. Land belonging to the rural proletariat has increased from 0% to 34.63%. The land reform laws benefited 29,400 semi-proletarian families, 18,219 established local proletarian families, 1,902 newly settled proletarian families, and 19,218 peasant families who already possessed some land. The peasants of Albania were liberated once and for all from the yoke of the Beys, the Ugas and their administrators. The blood they shed in the struggle for liberation was not shed in vain. The people's state power turned their age-long dream into reality. Our peasant, bowed down by centuries of suffering, stood up, and with a song on his lips and faith in his state power, is working on his own land for his own benefit. Just what immediate effect the land reform laws had, you will understand from two figures, which I shall quote. In 1938, the area of land under cultivation in Albania was 221,030 hectares, while this year the area under cultivation is 305,000 hectares. These are the initial effects of the implementation of the land reform laws. You can see for yourselves how profound are the consequences of the people's great revolution, how grand and immortal are the reforms of our people's state power. In addition to carrying out its land reform, our state power, immediately after liberation, attached primary importance to the sector of land improvement. During these 2 years, excluding the Milik lands, we have improved various lands covering an area of 6,764 hectares, by opening a total of 125 kilometers of drainage canals. During the same period, an additional 22 kilometers of irrigation canals have been opened, to irrigate 8,316 hectares of land. The completion of these projects will help to increase agricultural production. A further success of our people's state power in the economic field is the question of cooperatives. Cooperatives did not exist in our country in the past. They came into being as a consequence of the major economic, social and political transformations that have occurred in our country thanks to the National Liberation War. Within a short period of nearly 1 year, more than 317 cooperatives of various kinds have been set up. Consumer and peasants cooperatives, buying and selling cooperatives, handicraft cooperatives, cooperatives of working peasants and fishermen, etc. The consumer cooperatives which are functioning in our country today include 100 members with 180,000 dependents, representing 75% of the population of the towns where they function. Looking at these and many other tangible achievements, many may ask how these achievements and successes have been realized with such meager financial means, with insufficient technical equipment, and in a country in which the war had wrought such havoc. They have been attained thanks to the great vigor of our people, the creative efforts of the broad masses, the correct and consistent policy of our people's power, the mobilization of the entire people in building the country, the heroic selfless struggle for reconstruction, and the courage and tireless efforts of our cadres, which all made it possible to overcome obstacles and hardships and achieve these results. Is there any bastion that can resist the force of a united and heroic people such as ours? No, there is none. Only those who were opposed to the good of the people sneered from the start, vent their spleen and preached and worked to try to bring about the speedy downfall of our people's power. They posed as proficient financiers and economists and capable scientists and scholars. They claimed that they were predestined to buy hides and engage in other trades, and to make millions at the expense of our people, to speculate on the blood of the people, become spies and sell off their country to the foreigners. We do not deny them this proficiency, but under our regime the people do not allow them to take the reins of power in their hands, but send them to the rope or to prison to bring them to their senses. All these successes achieved so far will be the basis for us to advance continually forward. New forms of organization are now being applied to meet the substantial changes in our economy. From now on, we will have a planned economy, and this road will lead us to socialism. Our whole life should be devoted to the building of socialism in our country, because this is the only way for the face of Albania to be completely transformed, for its people to see better days, and for their life to be a life of happiness and freedom. This is the only way to wipe out misery, misfortune and ignorance, to strengthen love for our families and for one another, and to raise up a new man with new concepts, who will cherish his homeland as the apple of his eye, who will be devoted to his land, his factory in the work where he sheds his sweat, who will love other nations and respect and defend their freedom like that of his own country. This is the road our people are fully determined to build, a road at variance with that of the capitalist system where anarchy and chaos rule, where the iron heel of the trusts and monopolies dominates. Hunger, misery and misfortune abound, unemployment and the exploitation of the working class and of all the working people are the law, ignorance and corruption are rife, all human freedoms are mercilessly trampled underfoot, and men prey on their fellow men, a system which spawns war. We have all the conditions to proceed along our road. We should mobilize all the people's energies and set to work with 10 times greater efforts. The 1947 financial budget and the general state plan for 1947 will enable us to build a planned economy. We will be helped by the standardization of prices which allows us to plan state accumulation and does not leave the law of value to spontaneity, but guides the new structure and method of fixing and applying prices, and by the placing of wages and salaries on a correct basis. That is, he who works more and better gets higher pay when everything is taken into account: ability, work productivity, difficulties of the place of work, etc. These will enable us to build our economy according to plan. Now we are presenting our 1947 budget and plan for 9 months. As you will notice in the budget, the total sum of expenditure is 3,758,756,900 lakhs. This also includes the local budget, in which expenditure is 550,263,085 lakhs. Expenditure is wholly balanced by income. In conformity with the state budget, considerable investments are envisaged in the state plan, especially in the financing of the economy. The total sum of investments in the economic sector is over 1.5 billion lakhs, more than 40% of the budget. The principal investments will go to our mines, to our new and old industry, to agriculture, which takes up 12.55%, to public works and railways, 23.6%. More than 8% of the budget will go to education and culture, and 3% to health. As you can see for yourselves, our economy is advancing and growing stronger from year to year. With the application of the 5-year plan, which the government is drawing up and will submit to the People's Assembly in the very near future, our economy will be further strengthened in a progressive way. Our industry will be improved and expanded. The development of our mines will be a source of enrichment for our country, and all its resources will be used on an ever wider scale to improve the life of our people. This year we will build the Duracell-Busan Railway. This network will be extended during the coming years. Significant measures will be taken to improve and develop our agriculture, and investments will be made for important land improvement schemes. This will raise the living standard of our people, and we are already having good results. Only a few days ago, the government decided to raise and systematize wages and salaries, as I mentioned previously. At the same time, it decided to raise the bread ration for all categories of working people. These are achievements which have their basis in our people's power, in the people's correct understanding of the policy of our state power and of the democratic front, and in the broad participation and heroism of our people in the construction of our new economy and a better life. The realization of our plans, and the creation of a happy and prosperous life depend on our efforts, on everyone understanding well and carrying out scrupulously all the tasks which confront us. First of all, such a huge task cannot be accomplished without the participation of all the people, both young and old, without the total mobilization of all the energies of the broad masses of the people. This should be our first concern, and the concern of the entire democratic front. But the people as a whole will be mobilized when they are clear about the tasks confronting them, when they are correctly led, and correctly taught how to carry out the tasks, which will have the immediate result of improving their life. They must see these improvements in practice. They must experience them and be convinced. The people will be wholly mobilized and put all their efforts into carrying out these important tasks. When they become the primary factor in realizing these achievements, when they exercise control over them and implement their great law and justice in everything. If these things are not clear, no progress can be made. All these things are done for the people and carried out with the people. Anyone who thinks and acts otherwise is wrong, and is not on the consistent road of our progressive democracy. In order to accomplish these projects properly and carry out our plan, it is necessary to put all our efforts into consolidating and modernizing our people's power, and to do away with any shortcomings that may have occurred up to now. The state power should shake off any inertia, and any excessive or restrictive bureaucracy. It should assert itself in the village and in the locality, and not have merely administrative functions. The broad masses of people should take part in it on a large scale. The countryside plays an important role in the development of our economy, and the state power there should be stronger and have a more popular character. Our people's power should be improved all the time, so that it can carry out the great task assigned to it under the different circumstances and conditions created by the development of our country. In this, a major task falls upon our state employees, whose ability will be shown when they are able to adopt new forms, compatible with the spirit of the Constitution of the state and the rules and regulations in power, so as to carry out better the tasks that lie before them. The exact implementation of our plan depends on a good grasp of the tasks by all the state functionaries charged with carrying out our plan, and by all the workers, peasants and intellectuals of our country. All the tasks laid down in our plan are closely linked with one another, coordinated by, and conditional on, one another. Procrastination in one work sector, or failure to carry out the plan in that sector, has repercussions in all the other work sectors. Many things are new and important, but our cadres should concentrate all their efforts on learning and understanding them well, so that they may hold the reins of our economy firmly in their hands. Our greatest concern should be to improve our cadres and increase the number of specialized cadres. Cadres will solve all our problems. In this we should proceed with the greatest courage, promoting young people, as many young people as possible, sons and daughters of the working people. We should not be afraid to place them at the head of the work, to teach and guide them untiringly and with the greatest patience, and we will certainly see the work forge ahead. Only in this way will we progress. The strength of our people is inexhaustible, and our people have given ample proof that they are capable and intelligent, possess energy and vitality, and can certainly carry out the tasks assigned to them. The sons of our workers, the sons of our peasants, most of whom could neither read nor write, led the great struggle for liberation, and led our heroic army to victory, defeating the educated generals and high-ranking officers of fascism. Today they lead the detachments of our army with great proficiency. They have mastered the modern art of warfare, and are making continual progress. Note, before liberation over 80% of the population was illiterate. The sons of our workers and peasants are now in the most important leading posts in our state, and in the enterprises. Here are the cadres, and what fine cadres they are. Today, iron discipline is required of all state cadres in carrying out their tasks. Without this discipline our work is bound to proceed slowly, and no honest man, no Albanian patriot, wants this to happen. Only the enemies of the people. We need selflessness and honesty in work. Work should never tire us, but should become a matter of honor, and we should be encouraged to work even harder. In order to accomplish these major tasks we need good organization of work from every point of view. Good organization of the work is essential in order to accomplish our tasks precisely, to achieve sound results from our work and the sound education of our cadres, and to fulfill the entire plan. I think that all state functionaries, from the lowest to the highest rank, must face the responsibility to accomplish the tasks assigned to them by the people in the homeland. They should perform their tasks scrupulously, with honesty and self-denial. He who works, and discharges his task properly, is the most highly considered, the most respected and honored person in New Albania. He is the finest patriot who feels for his people. The government will take the severest measures against those who do not work, whether simple employees or ministers, and will never allow their presence in these posts to become a canker to contaminate our constructive work. In fully implementing the plan, we will rely on the broad mobilization of the people. We therefore appeal from this high rostrum of the People's Assembly, first and foremost, to the great patriotism of the working class of our country, and say, workers of Albania, stand in the front ranks as you have always done, because the happy future and security of our people rely on your physical and mental force, on your great determination and energy, on your boundless loyalty to the sacred cause of our people. You are the greatest guarantee of our people's power. Exert all your efforts in carrying out the various tasks which face you in the factories and work sites, in the state apparatus, or wherever you are employed. You should always be on the battlefront, setting an example to all, showing how to work better, how to fulfill and overfulfill work norms, master technique, and train people in work, how to protect the property of the state and the people, and protect the country. You are working for your state power, for your people, for yourselves, so do your duty better than ever. We appeal to the great patriotism of our peasants and say to them, peasants of all Albania, you are seeing concretely how your living conditions are improving all the time. You now have your own land given to you by the land reform, by the people's power. The shackles of the Bays and Nagas have been smashed for all time. But for this state power, which is your state power, you would never have emerged from the darkness. Therefore, your lives and the lives of your children, generation after generation, are linked like flesh to bone with this state power. You should exert all your efforts to consolidate this state power. Your task is to work your lands as well as you can, and produce as much as possible in order to have abundance for yourselves and to supply all Albania with your produce. Your alliance with the working class and working people of the city should be continually strengthened, and you should understand it well. Our people's power grants you every favor, and will give you ever greater aid. All these measures have one objective, that your life may become better all the time, and that you, through your work, may contribute with all your forces to the general good. It would be a mistake, and to the detriment of all, including you, if the favors and aid granted to you by the state power, in order to improve your work and boost production, were to be used for egoistic purposes and degenerate into exploitation. If such tendencies appear, you should fight them mercilessly, for these are tendencies and views of the Ugas and rich peasants who have exploitation in their blood. Nothing will be done which will adversely affect you. On the contrary, all the measures taken and ordinances issued by the government on the question of grain are in your favor. The reduction of prices of necessary goods is in your favor. The setting up of buying and selling cooperatives in the countryside is for your benefit and will make your work lighter, and the creation of work cooperatives is in your favor. Your task therefore is to improve your work as much as possible, and supply grain and other agricultural products to the other working masses of our country, to help in accumulating grain and other articles and to apply strictly the prices set by the government. Your private economy should also proceed along the road of our planned economy. You should struggle fiercely against any tendency which tries to divert you from this course, which is the only way to ensure your prosperity. We call on our patriotic intellectuals to muster all their energies to fulfill their tasks wherever they work. People who are truly educated and endowed with sound culture cannot stand aloof from the great cause of the people. They should place their knowledge unreservedly at the service of the country and the people. We appeal to the profound patriotism of the women of Albania. Today we are engaged in building new Albania, and the bitter past should no longer weigh on your shoulders. You must without fail march ahead, for you are a great force, a progressive force, from which our country expects a great deal. You should take part on a wide scale in production work, and many state functions should be in your hands. You should be in the factories and cooperatives, in the fields and schools. Our plan cannot be realized without your broad participation. Our state power will help you as much as possible to forge ahead and accomplish your tasks, and I am certain that you will accomplish them with the greatest heroism. We call on our heroic youth, the pride of the Albanian people. Our youth have always been ready and the first to go where the duty of the country and the people has called them. Their drive, their enthusiasm, their heroism and selflessness should be an example to all. Their achievements are countless, and each one is as important as the next. Everywhere, they are continually at work, and where youth work, where they learn and inspire, immortal works appear. The new life is for our youth, and they fully deserve it, for they are building it by their sweat and their brain work, putting their heart into the job. I'll advise anyone who wants to be reinvigorated and gain new strength, and to shake off any doubts and suspicions in his mind, to go to the railway the youth are building, to see for himself how the builders of New Albania work, learn, grow and enjoy themselves. We tell our youth that the Albanian people are very grateful to them for what they are doing for the country, and for what they will always continue to do. Our youth are a great factor in successfully fulfilling our state plan, and will most certainly accomplish their tasks both in study and at work. The achievements of our struggle had not only to be safeguarded, but also to be consolidated. They must serve as a sound basis on which to advance and fulfill completely the wishes and aspirations of our people. Here, of course, we were to have our first clashes with those who tried to bring to nothing the victories scored by the people during the war for liberation, so that in this way these enemies of the people might better maneuver and conspire to re-establish their hated capitalist domination. The great undertaking which awaited us after liberation therefore had to be, as always, the immortal work of the people, and had to reflect their continuous struggle. The people had to be mobilized to a man to carry out this task, inspired by the same ideal which guided them in their victorious war and endowed with the same courage and heroism which gave them victory over the Italian and German fascists and their lackeys. The struggle of our people had to be continued in other forms, but with the same tempo and the same determination as the first struggle. The struggle had to be waged on two fronts, for the reconstruction of the country and the building of a better and happier life, and against those who, in 1,000 treacherous ways, would hinder and fight against the correct course of our people. This was the question which faced us. To win the battle to build a new life, we had to exert all our physical and mental energies. We had to shed sweat in order to build a happy and free life, and to strike relentlessly at the enemies of every hue who would try to hamper us in our course. Whoever thinks that a livelihood can be earned without struggle, without toil and sacrifice, whoever thinks that the enemy of the people can be fought by making concessions or by patting him on the back and smiling, is linked with the enemies of the people and is an enemy of New Albania. There are and will continue to be such people, but this does not intimidate our people, and they will not be caught unawares. On the contrary, they are all the time heightening their vigilance to defend the country and their work, while the treachery of a few is doomed to failure, and will be nipped in the bud. The situation which arose in our country during the National Liberation War had bitter consequences for the beys with large estates, the landowners, the rich augurs and the wealthy bourgeoisie who had accumulated millions by bleeding the people white. These classes launched an open struggle, rifle in hand, side by side with the occupiers, against the people, but the people were victorious. Bloody battles were fought and won with great sacrifice by the people, and that is why the revolution of our people was a total one, on a sound foundation. The myth of the nationalists who gave allegiance to 100 flags was shattered. The bloody mask of the pseudo-democrat beys and augurs was torn to shreds. They were on the other side of the barricade. In order to safeguard their privileges in the regime that allowed them to oppress the people, the Albanian quislings who crossed the sea changed their boss, and became spies for the Anglo-American reaction. Nor could they have done otherwise, for this trade is in their blood. They are ready at every moment to sell out their country to the foreigners. What can link these individuals and their class with the Albanian people? Nothing but to aim to safeguard their privileges, to the detriment of the people. But the people told them to forget the old days, and this enrages them. However, not all those to whom the people and their state power are thorn in the flesh, not all the class of capitalists and privileged people fled to Italy or to the Greece of the monarcho-fascists. Some stayed here and were compelled to submit to the just laws of the people, and their clear-cut decisions, and this infuriates them. This exploiting class lost everything it had plundered from the people. Its privileges were abolished, and its lands, factories, concessions and colossal wealth were taken out of its hands and became the property of the majority, the property of the working people. But we should not fool ourselves and think that all these things were done without struggle, and that these people became magnanimous and generous. The wolf may put on sheep's clothing, but it never becomes a lamb. It is another matter if the wolf has its fangs drawn, but if we had left it alone, it would have devoured people's revolution. This did not happen, and will never happen, because the people have the proper instrument in their hands, and know how to use it. Nevertheless, the struggle between the capitalist and privileged class, on the one hand, and the working people and their state power, on the other, continued without interruption, passing through a number of different stages from the time of the liberation of Albania until now. This was class struggle with all its characteristics and in all its severity. Fascism, the most ruthless dictatorship of capital, was unable to suppress the freedom-loving nations or establish its law of terror and darkness. It was unable to suppress the working class of the people's democracies, but its remnants did not lay down their arms. Protected and encouraged by international reaction, especially Anglo-American reaction, they keep striving to regain ground and bring about the downfall of people's regimes, to pave the way for a third war, more ruthless than the Second World War. This process is also taking place in our country. To deny this process and underestimate this struggle means, to put it plainly, to hand the keys over to those who have tormented and sucked the blood of the people for generations, to set fascism back on its feet and dig our own graves. Our people are in no hurry to dig their own graves. On the contrary, they are working to make Albania flourish and to improve their life, and have no hesitation about settling accounts with those who try to bring back the old days. The important economic and social measures taken by our people's power in the early days following the liberation of Albania were only natural and correct. They transformed the face of Albania, devastated by long and bloody war. These measures, of course, strengthened the position of our state power. However, this was not to the liking of external or internal reaction. This was where their interests coincided, and the Beys, the Agas, the wealthy reactionary bourgeoisie, the reactionary pseudo-patriotic intellectuals, and the Beys, overseers and henchmen combined their struggle against the Albanian people, making common cause. They were joined by some of the liberal bourgeoisie whom the broad masses of the people had drawn into the war because they agreed to a certain point with the resistance against fascism, but they fought with many reservations, and joined the front for the purpose of gaining positions in the state power and, eventually, of seizing all power themselves. Many such people who were in the front, seeing that they could not attain their predetermined objectives, were greatly disillusioned, severed their connections with the front, and went over to the camp of the enemies of the people, the former ruling classes, realizing that they had lost their economic and political dominance, had to look elsewhere for support to regain their lost positions, to the detriment of the people. It goes without saying that, far from having any support among the Albanian people, they were at war with them, their only support being the foreigners' international reaction, headed by the Anglo-American reaction, which in fact supported their attempts, but they failed one after the other. The hostile attitude maintained towards the Albanian people by the US and British governments, as well as the denial of our legitimate rights won through bloodshed and sacrifice, had one objective: to support and strengthen their official representatives in Albania, who openly and contrary to every international law, violating the sovereignty of a people and interfering in their internal affairs, tried to the last day of their stay in Albania to rally and organize the Albanian reactionaries, instigating them to sabotage actions and armed struggle against the Albanian people. The activity of these Anglo-American representatives is widely documented with facts. Under the guidance of foreign agents, the reactionaries of our country attempted to revive the Bali Combater, Legalatiti and a number of other groups whose running dogs you can now find in monarcho-fascist Greece. Their common aim was to overthrow the state power by force, hoping for an Anglo-American landing in order to turn our country into a second Greece and to place it under the heel of US imperialism. This was the course followed by the remnants of the Bali Combater, Legalatiti and other reactionary groups. This was the course followed by the traitorous deputies. Note: this refers to the group of traitorous deputies who placed themselves in the service of the American and British imperialists to overthrow the people's power by force, who betrayed the confidence of the people, and this was the course that led them straight to prison. These treacherous elements did their utmost to discredit the just measures taken by the state power, sabotaged its work, and launched the most venomous and low slogans. I don't intend to list here their innumerable acts of treason, for what they did is so rotten that it makes you want to throw up. The Albanian people will soon hear these base elements testify before the court to their unparalleled crimes, baseness and treason. Let the justice of the people decide what they deserve. These elements carried out their treacherous activity at a time when all the Albanian people were hard at work rebuilding the country, when old and young were working under difficult economic conditions to build a new life. These people could not reconcile themselves with this situation. Take these individuals one by one, analyze their past, their work, their life, and you will see that they are the scum of society, speculators involved in all kinds of dishonest dealings. These people have infiltrated into the great undertaking of our people for the sole purpose of sabotaging it. We found them in the implementation of the land reform. We found them where bridges and roads were being built and land improvement schemes carried out. We found them in the state apparatus, and even in our parliament. These people complain that there is no democracy here, but terror. If by the word democracy they mean freedom for criminals, thieves, speculators, money lenders and other such people, freedom for those who make an attack on the rights and freedom of the people, then it is true that there is not and will never be such democracy in Albania. Who are those who resort to terror our people and their state power, or the criminals and traitors who organize sabotage activities and support the war criminals, who make attempts on the life of honest people, who seek to wreck and exploit what has been achieved by the hard work of the people? Do these individuals imagine that the justice of the people will allow them to act at their ease, to shelter the war criminals and eat and drink with them, to sell the secrets of the state and of the people for sterling and dollars, or will leave them free to sabotage and murder the sons of the people and upholders of their state power? Why do these criminals try to commit suicide in jail, to hang themselves in prison cells with their belts, and why do they jump out of windows to put an end to their lives? Those who are not guilty do not do such things. The correct policy of our state power has always been characterized by the greatest determination to protect the people and their achievements, and to guard the country from any external and internal threats. It is marked by its determination to forge steadily and speedily ahead to build a happy life for our people. The correct policy of our state power has always been characterized by great wisdom and level-headedness in passing judgment, in pardoning minor offenses which can be corrected and are committed with no ulterior motives, but it is severe against the enemies of the people. Our state power will carry out this correct policy consistently. It has always been our concern and the duty of the Democratic Front to do as much as possible to rescue from the clutches of reaction ordinary people who have gone wrong. We should educate them, make them useful citizens of the country, and set them on the right course, the course of honor. There may be people who consider this correct and humane policy of our state power and our Democratic Front to be a sign of weakness, but we assure them that they are greatly mistaken. And if these individuals, on the basis of this erroneous judgment, try to harm the interests of the people, thinking that they will not be seen, we repeat that they are greatly mistaken. The Albanian people work and are on their guard in order to safeguard their freedom and their achievements. Our people know very well that their enemies cannot be eliminated in one day or in 1 year. In all our victories, some of these individuals will come to the surface, because the efforts and ceaseless work of the people will tear off the masks of these enemies. In their great and sacred undertaking, our people should always be on their guard and correctly assess every situation that is created by their progressive work. Just as we mobilized to build a country, we must also mobilize to fight a relentless campaign against our enemies, be they internal enemies or agents of foreign imperialism. There can be no compromise with our enemies, and no mercy towards them. This is the only way to consolidate the work of the people, the only way for our country to be strengthened and make progress, and for our people's democracy to be consolidated. This should be the course followed by New Albania. It is true that Albania is a small country, but in the international arena it has its deserved place and importance. The fact that the Albanian people and their people's democracy are being unjustly and dishonestly fought by the Anglo-Americans and their lackeys justifies the role of our democracy in safeguarding peace and world security, and at the same time justifies the correct and well thought out policy of the government of our republic. All our people and all the progressive peoples of the world, including the people of the United States and Britain, are well aware that the hostile stand of the British and American governments towards our country cannot be justified by purely technical considerations, or by unreasonable arguments such as the question of the treaties, or by the absurd excuses these governments invented in order to maintain a tense situation between our state and the United States of America and Great Britain. All the pretexts, accusations and slanders brought against our country and kept on the agenda by these governments have a premeditated aim. Their real aim is quite different from their stated purpose, namely, that they wanted to size up the situation and, in order to speed up the recognition of our government, sent the political and military representatives of the United States of America and Britain to Albania. The British and U.S. governments are not favorably inclined towards the Albanian people, and they have given daily proof of this. The Albanian people have become masters of their own destiny. They are building their country and their free life by their own efforts and in the way they choose. And democracy in our country is growing stronger every day and becoming a factor for the strengthening of peace and world security. These facts are not to the liking of international reaction and the British and U.S. governments. If they do not like this, and do not like the great progressive work that is being done in Albania, that is their business. But if they interfere in the internal affairs of our country, organize the remnants of Albanian reaction within and outside Albania, and openly help them to sabotage the great undertaking of the people which is costing Albania so much blood and sweat, we are strongly opposed to this, and will not tolerate such a thing. And in this we are wholly within our rights. Ours is almost the only government not recognized by the British and U.S. governments, at a time when these governments have their diplomatic representatives even in the satellite countries. Such a situation, however, in no way affects our constant advance in the consolidation and progress of our people's democracy. The Albanian people and their people's republic have won the sympathy and great respect of all the progressive people of the world. But such a situation dishonors the British and American people. Let the people of these two countries and the whole of world public opinion judge for themselves the stand of the British and U.S. governments towards the heroic people of a small country who shed much blood fighting against fascism, who set up their own democratic people's power, and who are determined to use their small forces to defend world peace and security as best they can. Is it because of this that our country is not recognized? Is this why our people are denied their rights in the international arena? The Albanian people are fully convinced that these are the only reasons that their rights are not recognized by the British and U.S. governments. Any any other reason is groundless and does not stand up to scrutiny. If the people were not in power in Albania, if our country were ruled by the quislings and spies of fascism who, contrary to international law, are today being supported in 1,000 ways by the British and US governments, then things would have been different. Albania would of course have been recognized by those governments, but our country would have become a second Greece where Zogan the terror of the Bayzand. War criminals would reign supreme, and the people would have been subjected to the greatest misery, unparalleled in their history. It is precisely in order to establish this rule of terror in our country, and to establish the class of speculators and war criminals in Albania, that the British and US governments maintained and continue to maintain this unjust attitude towards our country. The practical activity of the official representatives of the British and US governments in Albania pursued such a political objective. Our government is in possession of astounding proofs and facts which indicate that the political and military missions of the British and US governments in Albania did not represent the two peoples of these countries, whom our people hold in high esteem, but were an espionage agency of Anglo-American reaction which worked out plans to overthrow our people's power, and planned sabotage actions and the most shameful crimes against the sovereignty of the peace-loving and heroic people of a small country. This is not how the Albanian people interpret their friendship with the people of Britain and the United States, and they will never reconcile themselves with the friendship which their official representatives cultivated in Albania. But the activity of the British and US governments is not confined to the activities I have mentioned. It has a broader scope, using every means and going as far as creating international complications. In addition to the activities I have spoken of, the British and US governments have endeavored to present Albania as a dangerous country threatening world peace and international security. Albania is a threat to peace. This resembles the argument which fascist Italy used in order to attack the Greek people, the argument of Enver Hoxha's murder. Note summer 1940. This man was found killed on the border with Greece. Italy used this as a pretext to attack Greece on October 7940 and to ensure the support of Albania. 2. You have no doubt followed attentively the sequence of events related to the incident purposely provoked by the British in Saranda, which they raised a hue and cry about in the Security Council and at the International Court at The Hague, with a view to convincing the world by their false and shaky arguments that Albania was endangering peace. Albania has never laid mines along its coasts. It has possessed neither mines nor the means to lay them. Official British documents prove that the British acknowledge the existence of mines which have remained in those waters from the time of the war. They admit that there is no certainty that the removal of the mines, which they themselves carried out, was completely effective, and that the navigation route appears unsafe. The mines could also easily have been laid by British ships or by those of their lackeys in Athens. And this raises a question: what were the English ships after and repeatedly violating the sovereignty of our territorial waters? They must surely have had some purpose. The British claim the right of passage for their peaceful ships through the Corfu Channel, but the route through this channel is not 500 meters away from the seaport of Saranda, on the Himara coast, and peaceful navigation does not mean having all guns at the ready and aimed towards our ports. What about the provocations of the ships of their Athenian lackeys 8 times in succession, not to mention those that happen every day? What were they after in our territorial waters, up to the very vicinity of our ports? Or did they too have peaceful purposes in seizing our boats with people on board and taking them to Corfu, or in shelling our coastal regions and bombarding the villages of Knispel? It is not hard to understand why they did these things. Despite the votes the Anglo-Americans always rally in the Security Council to gain approval for such trumped-up and aggressive acts, right is on our side and no threat or blackmail can force us to our knees in our struggle to regain our rights, and justice will always be on the side of the just. What the British and Americans brought up as an allegedly persuasive and final argument at the 11th hour about the incident at Saranda was, the Albanian government either laid the mines itself or knows who has laid them, because it guards its borders and coastline with the greatest jealousy. But this final argument proves nothing, or rather, it proves one thing which we fully admit, because it is quite true that we guard our coastline and our southern borders with the greatest jealousy and determination, for they are sacred for us and fascist wolves are roaming about them. With the all-round aid of the British and Americans, the monarcho-fascist government in Athens has become a chronic and very perilous danger not only to peace in the Balkans, but to world peace. The misfortune of the heroic Greek people cannot be described. Remember February 4th in Tirana? Note on February 4th, 1944 the forces of the Bali Commodore and Quisling Gendarmerie, in collaboration with a German occupier, organized a big massacre in Tirana to frighten the people away from the National Liberation War. It is always like that day in all the towns and villages of Greece. Monarcho-fascist terror has reached its peak. But Greece has become, at the same time, the center of armed attacks and numerous provocations against our country and against all the other democratic countries of the Balkans. For years now, provocations by the Greek fascists along our borders, far from subsiding, have increased and are being carried out with greater fascist fury. The Greek fascists attack our border posts, penetrate into our territory, kill and injure peaceful citizens working in their fields, carry out air raids and kill people and livestock, rally and organize Albanian war criminals, and try to infiltrate them into our territory in order to organize murders and theft. All these crimes are part and parcel of the general plan of the Anglo-American reactionaries, in the face of these bloody, bandit-like provocations which are aimed solely at disturbing peace in the Balkans and in the world and launching a new war. As the Harry Truman, President of the USA between 1945-1931, doctrine proclaimed, the Albanian government has repeatedly appealed to the United Nations to take steps to put an end to these numerous provocations by the Greek monarcho-fascists. The UN Inquiry Commission which came to Greece was faced with many undeniable facts which proved the culpability of the monarcho-fascist government in Athens which, in collusion with the Anglo-Americans, bears sole responsibility for the civil war in Greece. Numerous incontestable facts were brought before the Inquiry Commission by the representative of the Albanian government, facts which proved convincingly the criminal actions of the monarcho-fascist government in Athens, its responsibility for the countless incidents it has caused along our border, the provocative piratical incursions of Greek ships into our territorial waters, the violation of the sovereignty of our country by its bands, the massacre of the Albanian population of Cameria, of which there is incontestable documented proof, and finally, the responsibility of the monarcho-fascist government in Athens and its British supporters for the internal civil war. But in spite of that, attempts are being made to hush up the truth, to cover the sun with a sieve, as our people say, and the British, the Americans and those who usually cast their votes for them are trying to shift the responsibility for the bloody civil war which is raging furiously in Greece onto the Albanian, Yugoslav and Bulgarian governments. But this argument can fool nobody. Nobody accepts it. It was not the Albanian, Yugoslav or Bulgarian governments which stirred up or armed the heroic Greek people to rise with arms in hand to gain their freedom, and the 10,000 partisans who are fighting heroically in the mountains. They were prompted to take up arms by the misery of their homeland, the wretched condition of their people, the ideal of freedom and democracy, which is being trampled underfoot by the monarcho-fascists in Athens and their supporters. They were driven to fight by the great terror of the Greek fascists. The Albanian people and their government have never interfered in Greece's internal affairs, because these are not their affairs, and they reject any such slanders from whatever quarter they may come. The Albanian government and the Albanian people do, however, accept and will continue to accept on their territory and to show hospitality to people and Democrats persecuted by the Greek fascists. This is in accordance with our constitution and prevailing international law. The Albanian people and their government want to be left in peace to build their new life, and they want to see an end to the Greek fascist provocations. The Albanian government and the Albanian people will in no way permit the Greek monarcho-fascist bands to encroach upon their borders, and will protect their homeland, their lives and their democracy to the death. Our heroic army, which used to operate on July 10th, is the most reliable defender of our achievements, of the life we are building, and of the integrity of our country. Note, July 7943, the day when the General Staff of the National Liberation Army of Albania was created, entered history as the day of the founding of the People's Army of Albania. But the tragedy of the Greek people is but one of the many features of the doctrine of Truman and Churchill. At the head of entire international reaction, U.S. imperialism tries to engulf the whole world and to suppress the freedom of the peoples by threats, the atomic bomb, and its policy of force in the dollar. The imperialists launched a broad campaign of slanders against the Soviet Union, against that country and people who saved the world from fascism and to which mankind is forever grateful, against the Soviet Union, which stands like an unconquerable fortress in defense of peace and mankind, and frustrates all the schemes of the warmongers and enslavers of the peoples of the world. But the freedom-loving people of all countries have rallied all their energies to defend the peace which cost them so dearly, and to frustrate all the maneuvers of the warmongers. The Marshall Plan. Note, the plan of economic and political subjugation of the countries of Europe to the USA through economic aid, presented in 7947 by the Secretary of U.S. State Department George Marshall, and approved by the Congress of the USA in 7948. One is another aspect of the Truman Doctrine, of the policy of the dollar and of enslavement. The Albanian government and the Albanian people have attentively followed the proceedings of the Paris Conference of the three foreign ministers, for our country stands in need of aid. Note, this refers to the Conference of the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the USSR, Great Britain and France, which was convened in Paris in June, 1947, to discuss the economic aid the U.S. government offered to the countries of Europe. The Paris Conference ended inconclusively. The views of the Soviet Union were at variance with those of the governments of Britain and France as expressed in the official press of the three countries. Some days ago our government received an official invitation from the French and British governments to attend a conference organized by them in connection with the Marshall Plan. After studying this question, our government unanimously turned down the invitation of the British and France governments to attend this conference, which will be held on July 12, because, in our government's opinion, there exists no concrete plan for USA to Europe, and the Marshall Plan itself is very vague and imprecise. As far as the organization drafted by the French and British governments is concerned, the opinion of our government is that, far from facilitating the distribution of any US aid among the European people, it aims at working out a general economic plan for Europe under the direction of Britain and France, with the definitive approval of the United States. Such a plan would cause economic chaos in Europe, and by interfering in the internal affairs of the European states, by violating their will and sovereignty, would place the economy of these states under the direction and at the mercy of bigger European states and the United States of America. This plan would cause the creation of a bloc and a split in Europe. In extending an invitation to our government, the British and French governments intended to present us with an accomplished fact which we could in no way accept, because our government is convinced that only respect for the principle of sovereignty and national independence can be the basis of sincere and fruitful collaboration among nations. The Albanian government can never allow or accept the violation of the sovereignty and independence of our country. All these considerations compelled our government to turn down the invitation of the French and British governments. But there is still another great reason which heightens the suspicion and distrust of the Albanian government towards U.S. aid and its objectives, and this is connected with the consistently hostile attitude maintained by the British and U.S. governments towards the undeniable rights of our people. Taking into account this incorrect and quite unjustifiable stand, it is quite natural for the Albanian people and their government to suspect the sincerity of American aid and the real objective of this aid. In these post-war times, the people of Europe, who suffered the most horrible devastations in the war and who witnessed with their own eyes and paid dearly for the barbarous attacks of the Hitlerites and their satellites, instigated by the activity and policy of the reactionary and imperialist cliques, have together with the progressive peoples of the whole world exerted all their efforts to prevent the repetition of such a catastrophe. They will all frustrate the maneuvers of such warmongers as Churchill and company. The question is to protect genuine democratic peace by every means, to protect our lives and the lives of our children, and to protect our victories which have cost us bloodshed and devastation. The people of Little Albania will continue to exert all their energies to defend and consolidate such a peace in favor of the progressive peoples of the world, who are striving for the same end. To defend such a peace is just as essential as was the victory over the German Nazis. Such a peace will be achieved despite the attempts of the warmongers to launch another war. It will be achieved just as the victory over Hitlerite Germany was achieved. The people of the world, and the Soviet Union under the leadership of the great Stalin, will fight for the consolidation of a just peace, of real peace. On the side of the Soviet Union, which rescued mankind from fascism, are all the progressive and freedom-loving peoples of the world, and also the people of our small country, because the Soviet Union protects our people. Young and old in our country have understood, and feel deeply in their hearts, that without the heroic war of the people of the Soviet Union, there would be no free and democratic Albania, and the Albanian people would have been massacred and oppressed without mercy. Old and young in Albania have seen with what determination the Soviet Union has championed our rights and defended our country, our independence, and the bloodshed by our sons and daughters, who fell on the field of honor fighting heroically against fascism. Therefore, it is natural for the Albanian people to love the Soviet Union greatly, at a time when warmongers threaten the world with force, the atomic bomb, and the dollar, when international reaction is doing all in its power to suppress progressive democracy and revive the dark forces of fascism. The powerful voice of the Soviet Union is firmly defending peace and security, defending the people and their progressive democracy. Our people enthusiastically hail the correct and peaceful policy of the Soviet Union, because it is a living expression of the lofty and noble sentiments of the people of the entire USSR and their regime, which abides by the principle of defending freedom and genuine democracy, of defending the big and small nations and genuine peace. The relations of our people with the friendly Bulgarian people are becoming more and more cordial and friendly, and our people heartily wish Dimitrev's new Bulgaria a prosperous future. Albania will soon establish diplomatic relations with the Romanian people, and our people wish and hope to establish such relations with other democratic nations, which is in the general interest of peace. Comrade deputies, I wish to assure you that the government I have the honor to lead will exert all its efforts to implement this correct policy, which expresses the aspirations and wishes of our people. It will exert all its efforts to carry out this constructive and progressive policy, and to apply correctly and promptly the laws which the People's Assembly of the People's Republic of Albania approves, and will defend with the greatest determination the interests of the people, the life of the people, and our People's Republic, everything at all times in the service of our country and our people. Long live the Albanian people. Letter to Comrade Hisni Capo, date, July 30th, 1978. Translated, Arnrjevan, from German. Preface. Because Comrade Hisni Capo was at that time recovering from a heart attack, he wasn't able to participate in the conference of the Central Committee of the PLA, where the answer from the Party of Labour of Albania and the government of the SBR Albania to the Communist Party of China and the government of China regarding the stop of credits to the SBR Albania and of all economic relations to Albania, was accepted. This letter from Comrade Enver Hoxha was the reply to a letter which Comrade Hisni Capo had sent to the Central Committee of the PLA and to Comrade Enver Hoxha. In this letter he condemned the anti-Marxist and anti-Albanian actions of the Chinese leadership and expressed his full solidarity with the correct position of the Party of Labour and the Albanian government. In Comrade Enver Hoxha's letter, the policies of the Chinese leadership as well as the events at the time in China are examined carefully. Zeri Ipapulat decided to publish this letter to point out the actual political and ideological backgrounds of the mock trials which took place from the second half of November and lasted till the first days of January, 1981, and were aimed against the so-called Gang of Four and a group of high-ranking military leaders from the time of the Cultural Revolution. Comrade Hisni Capo died in December, 1979, after a serious disease. Comrade Enver Hoxha's letter, which was first published on December 4, 1980, was displayed in the Museum Hisni Capo in the village of Comrade Hisni Capo's birth, Turbak district of Lora. Dear Comrade Hisni, the letter you sent to me and in which you write that you are feeling better, that you are already taking walks in the garden and in the parks of the palace and that you are going to visit the beach at Durrës tomorrow made me very happy. It is clear that everything is possible, is achievable with enough patience and willpower. Therefore we are liberated of the trouble which your disease caused you as well as us, your comrades, and the whole party. You will return full of health and vitality to the party and its leadership, who always has needed and still needs your thoughts and your guidance. The Chinese have received the answer they deserve. Our party and its leadership have acted totally correctly in the Marxist-Leninist way. Based on facts we have exposed another great enemy, Chinese revisionism, which was hiding so long behind the mask of Marxism-Leninism. The Communist Party of China and especially Mao Zedong, who was an idealist dreamer and utopian without general education, apart from the one about ancient China, followed the development of human history as xenophobic dilettantes. Their ideological, political and organizational principles, especially since the foundation of the Communist Party, are demonstratively pragmatical and solely focused on China's interests with the obvious aim of transforming eternal China into a superpower which controls the world, dictates the law, imposes its own culture and its own will upon others. During the analysis of their, Mao and the Chinese leaders, Regimen, actions we encountered this Chinese ideology. We saw and still see that their form of organization and their operation scheme are focused on this ideology, which it is their aim to make universal. The figure of Mao Zedong has been blown up until it has reached the dimensions of a Chinese emperor, and indeed, this modern emperor operates omnipotently over his courtiers, who have created an extensive and terrible bureaucracy in which the brilliant ideas of the great steersman are carried out. He used the Communist Party as a stepping stone and has been doing so whenever he feels like it and as often as he thinks it is reasonable, depending on the dialectical development of the contradiction seen from the perspective of Taoism. He makes people drop from power, attacks the party and liquidates it, starts some revolution and balances the power of the courtiers. He explains all this with allegedly revolutionary phrases which are in fact nothing but more cultured actions than those of Emperor Bokassa, the Shah of Iran or the King of Nepal, whom Mao liked very much, whom he welcomed and accompanied, not only because material interests, such as the hope of gaining political advantages and to make them into Chinese satellites, made him do so, but also because Mao's philosophy coincided completely with their own. Under those conditions and following those perceptions, the Communist Party of China could be no Marxist-Leninist party. The philosophy which it followed was idealistic, bourgeois reactionary, because China itself, the society there, remained in spite of the bourgeois democratic revolution a closed society with an old faith and outdated mentalities, dominated by mysticism and in the core archaic, only seemingly adhering to developed philosophical and state organizational principles. We see this in the construction and the structure of the state. We see this in the economic development, in the construction of the educational and cultural system, in the structure of the army, etc. All this bears the specific Chinese stamp. From the ideology and the literature to the slogans originate from one source, and every man and woman in China, be they small or big, has to repeat them, without deviating only for 1 millimeter from them. This was a struggle to lull creative thinking. This oppressed every form of democracy, and this was nothing else but the cult of the steersman and the reign of bureaucracy. Such an aberrant ideology has to suffer defeats in certain moments, and it did suffer them. Mao Zedong preached about this, calling it revolutions and counter-revolutions periodically returning every 7 years. One must not label Mao Zedong as a prophet of the revolution but as a prophet of the counter-revolution. He represented the type of the anarchist in whose blood runs confusion, chaos, the undermining of the dictatorship of the proletariat and socialism, but under the condition that this permanent anarchy was led by him or by his typical Chinese anarchist ideology. Mao Zedong is a Chinese Bakunin. The Cultural Revolution was an expression of the ideas and action of this Chinese Bakunin. The chaos which resulted in China, which originated from this anti-Marxist, traitorous line of Mao Zedong and his courtiers, a chaos full of defeats in politics, ideology and economy, was fought by the great steersman through the anarchy of the Cultural Revolution. This anarchist revolution saved the Maoist absolute rule but contained the risk of undermining it, too. The prestige of the steersman had to be saved. The anarchy was not allowed to topple the myths, and therefore military measures were taken. The character of bureaucracy with the courtier Zhou and Lake Confucius was saved, and supposedly younger revolutionary elements were integrated into the scene of agitation and propaganda, for whom the steersman had intended the role of painting out the anarchy as a revolution within the revolution, by which the alleged bourgeoisie, which had infiltrated the party, was supposed to be eliminated. But in fact there was no party but only the bourgeoisie. There were clans and fractions which were fighting for power. This was the Trotskyist permanent revolution led by Mao Zedong. Trotsky, the so-called Gang of Four, acted according to Mao's advice. In him they found a foothold, therefore they live as long as a summer flower, only that this flower was foul-smelling and poisonous like all the other flowers and schools which blossomed in China and are still blossoming. The Gang of Four was a group of megalomaniac, ambitious, intricate babblers without any principles, just like the other fractions of the bourgeoisie which were swimming in the swamp. But those latter ones controlled the swamp, whereas the Gang of Four only had the key to the haystack. They did not undertake the least organizational, governmental or economical action. They only wrote articles and organized ballet performances. They were suspicious persons like all the others. They were aimlessly hovering like Mao's thoughts, while the fraction of Zhou, Deng and Yi were systematically doing their best in order to take over power. The Gang of Four thought they would attract the millions under Mao's banner by bombastic words, but the temporarily overthrown Deng was able to assemble 1 million at the Tiananmen Square who shouted against the Gang of Four. Later the Gang of Four mobilized 1 million against Deng. Those were the same people who shouted for the one as well as for the other. Deng came to power, 1 million appeared and shouted for Deng. They were the same who had shouted against him before. This is the bitter and dark mirror of Mao Zedong thought. The bourgeois world called the Gang of Four radical. If you wish, you can also add the term socialist and call them radical socialist, but those four were neither radical nor socialist. Formerly there was a strong bourgeois party in France which called itself radical socialist and was led by the bourgeoisie, by extraordinary politicians and literates like Harriet, Daladier and others. But this party, which suffered a total defeat, left some marks. However, the radical four disappeared without a trace, just like the Mao Zedong thought died, respectively as dying. The black reaction of Hua Guofeng and Deng Xiaoping, which seized power, will lead a power struggle in order to build a fascist dictatorship. There will be a fight about world hegemony. The strategy they pursue is only logical. The alliances with American imperialism and the world reaction are logical and normal. Just as normal are the antagonisms and the outbreak of the predatory wars which will result from this fellowship of bandits. The analyses we conduct regarding the Chinese revisionism are generally correct, objective in the light of Marxism, Leninism. Maoism's anti-Marxist theory is dying. It will face the same destiny as the other theories invented by world capitalism by the decaying imperialism. The currently ruling crew in China and the others who will definitely follow as a result of the internal fraction fights for power will use Maoism, doing so however by using it as an anti-historical corpse in order to ruthlessly, shamelessly build a powerful imperialist Chinese state, in unity respectively in divergence with the other imperialists and through the oppression of peoples who long for liberation, independence, and socialism and who will fight for it. Every single foul means is good enough for the Chinese revisionists, just like they are for their American, Soviet and other imperialist friends. Our just fight will be long and difficult. At the same time we have to keep the party strong. In militant revolutionary unity, we have to steel it hourly, daily in the constant political, ideological and economical struggles, sharpen its vigilance to the utmost in order to make it beloved by the people and bound to it in flesh and spirit, through a proletarian democracy which is far away from every form of opportunism, sectarianism and sick and fatal bureaucracy. The correct Marxist-Leninist line of our party will not only today but also in the future be supported by the revolutionary Marxist-Leninists worldwide. It will be supported by the world proletariat and the peoples. The daily, struggle-filled routine of our party confirms this. The fascist revisionist Chinese cliques will stop at nothing to antagonize the Chinese people through propaganda and other means and to deceive the world public. But they will not be able to deceive everyone at once. Terrible waves have befallen the Chinese people and will keep doing so. But the day will come when the theory of Marx, Engels, Lenin and Stalin will triumph, too. The current and future generations in China will come to understand this and say, the Party of Labor of Albania has opened our eyes, has acted correctly, it has unmasked the Mao Zedong thought, because it, the PLA, Revan, was for the proletarian revolution in China. It wanted to dispel the devastating myths which were created in China and which hindered the happiness of this great people which wish to live in true socialism. Our victorious struggle continues. Dear Comrade Hisny, therefore get well soon. Spend a pleasant and quiet holiday so that we will feel stronger and stronger in the battles which lie ahead. As strong as steel, I'll embrace you and kiss you full of yearning. Enver Hoxha July 30th, 1978. Letter to the 9th Conference of the Chinese Communist Party. Date, April 29, 1969. Source, Peking Review No. 19, May 5, 1969. Dear comrades, allow me, on behalf of the Central Committee of the Albanian Party of Labor, of the Albanian Communists and the whole Albanian people, who followed with indescribable enthusiasm and great attention the proceedings of the 9th National Congress of the Fraternal Communist Party of China, to express to you the most cordial revolutionary congratulations on the full success of the 9th National Congress of your glorious party and on the historic decisions it adopted. The 9th Congress marks a brilliant page in the long history of the great Communist Party of China, which is full of heroic and legendary struggles. It affirmed the revolutionary Marxist-Leninist line of Chairman Mao in the decisive victory of the great proletarian cultural revolution. It firmly held and raised higher the red banner of revolution and socialism. It further strengthened and tempered the party, its unity of thought and action on the basis of the invincible thought of the great Marxist-Leninist Comrade Mao Zedong. The programmatic documents, Chairman Mao's speeches, the political reports by Vice Chairman Lin Piao, and the new party constitution, which were unanimously approved at the Congress, have opened brilliant prospects for the Chinese Communist Party and the 700 million Chinese people to achieve greater new victories throughout the country, to carry the revolution through to the end, to advance at a faster speed in the building of socialism and communism in China. We are exceptionally glad that the historic 9th National Congress of the Communist Party of China unanimously elected, in an ardent revolutionary atmosphere, the party leadership with Comrade Mao Zedong, the founder and great leader of the Communist Party of China, the outstanding Marxist-Leninist and the strategist of genius of revolution, as its leader, and with his close comrade in arms Comrade Lin Piao as its deputy leader. We heartily greet the new Central Committee elected by the 9th National Congress of the Communist Party of China. This Central Committee is made up of revolutionaries tested in fierce class battles and in the flames of the great proletarian, cultural revolution and boundlessly faithful to Chairman Mao Zedong and to his invincible thought. The Albanian communists and people, who are with the Chinese Communist and people, and all other Marxist-Leninist and revolutionaries in the world. See in the decisions of the 9th National Congress of your glorious party the great guarantee that the Communist Party of China will always hold high the inflexible banner of Marxism-Leninism, of socialism and proletarian internationalism, will further consolidate and strengthen the dictatorship of the proletariat and will make great people's China a still more powerful fortress and prop of the liberation struggle of the peoples and of the world revolution. The 9th National Congress of the Communist Party of China, a congress of proletarian victory over the traitorous, revisionist and counter-revolutionary line of the renegades, traitor and scab Liu Shaoqi, marks a new stage not only in the carrying out of socialist revolution and socialist construction in China, but also in the fight for the triumph of Marxism-Leninism over revisionism, of socialism over capitalism and of revolution over counter-revolution in the world. This is why the hearts and minds of the Marxist-Leninists and revolutionaries of the whole world were directed in these days towards your great Congress. This is why their hearts are filled with joy at this great historic event, the solemn declaration of the Congress that the Communist Party of China, nurtured by the great leader Chairman Mao, always upholds proletarian internationalism and firmly supports the revolutionary struggles of the proletariat and the oppressed peoples and nations of the whole world, inspires all the communist and revolutionary peoples and gives them strength and courage to broaden and push forward incessantly their struggle against imperialism led by US, against modern revisionism led by Soviet revisionism, and against all the reactionaries, in order to create a new world without capitalism, without imperialism, without oppressors and exploiters. The 9th National Congress of the Communist Party of China dealt a fresh crushing blow to the Soviet Khrushchevite revisionists, to these renegades, to the great Lenin-Stalin cause, who have transformed themselves into social imperialists and social fascists and who are in a close counter-revolutionary alliance with the US imperialists, the most ferocious enemies of the peoples. The imperialist revisionist aggressive plans against great socialist China and the freedom-loving peoples of the world will fail ignominiously, and the US imperialists and the Soviet revisionists will be completely and definitely smashed. There is no force on earth that can stop the victorious march of revolution. There is no force on earth that can save the imperialists and the revisionists from their thorough defeat. The revolutionary cause of the peoples will surely triumph. The Albanian communists and people, who are bound by an unbreakable friendship with the Chinese communists and people, immeasurably rejoice at the great victory of the 9th National Congress of the Communist Party of China, and they regard it as their own victory. Our hearts throb as one. We are inseparable brothers and comrades in arms. Our unity is steel-like. The 9th National Congress of your heroic party will certainly strengthen still more the great friendship and solidarity between our two parties and countries. It will further enhance our two parties and countries. It will further enhance our common struggle for the triumph of the great cause of Marxism, Leninism and of the liberation of the peoples. The Albanian Party of Labor and the entire Albanian people wholeheartedly wish that the Communist Party of China and the great Chinese people, armed with all conquering Mao Tse-tung thought and under the wise and far-sighted Marxist-Leninist leadership of Mao Tse-tung, will achieve new and ever greater successes and victories on the bright road of socialism established by the 9th National Congress. Long live the great and glorious Communist Party of China. May Chairman Mao, great leader, great Marxist-Leninist and the closest friend of the Albanian people, live as long as the mountains. May the unbreakable friendship and militant unity between our two parties and peoples last forever and grow with each passing day. Enver Hoxha, First Secretary of the Central Committee of the Albanian Party of Labor, April 29, 1969, Tirana. Speech in commemoration of the 20th anniversary of the founding of the Party of Labor of Albania and the 44th anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution, Tirana, November 7, 1961. Excerpts delivered on November 7, 1961, at the Tirana festive meeting commemorating the 20th anniversary of the founding of the Party of Labor of Albania and the 44th anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution. First publication, in English, in the Party of Labor of Albania in Battle with Modern Revisionism, Naim Frashëri Publishing House, Tirana, Albania, 1972. Dear comrades, we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of our party in new international conditions very favorable to the forces of peace, democracy and socialism. 20 years ago, when the Albanian Communist Party was founded, the world was ruled by the capitalist system, a system of oppression and wild exploitation of peoples. The Soviet Union, the first country of victorious socialism, was at that time encircled on all sides by capitalist countries. Whole continents were suffering under the colonial yoke of imperialism. The most reactionary forces of bourgeoisie, the fascist and militarist states, incited by the most aggressive circles of international imperialism, had unleashed the Second World War. They had put under their yoke whole nations and, like wild beasts, they were rushing against the offspring of the Great October Socialist Revolution, the Soviet Union. Today, after 20 years, great radical changes have taken place in the world, owing to the great patriotic war of the Soviet peoples. In the first place, there was achieved the historic victory over fascism. The Soviet Union became the liberator of the enslaved European peoples. New states broke away from the capitalist system and embarked on the road of socialism. The People's Revolution triumphed in China. This is the greatest historic event after the October Socialist Revolution. So socialism came out of the borders of a single country and became a world system stretching from the Adriatic coasts to the coasts of the Pacific Ocean. This is the greatest historic victory of the international working class. The world socialist system, which includes in its fold over 1 billion people with a big economic and military potential continually growing at unprecedented rates, has become today the decisive factor in the development of the world history. It exerts a tremendous influence on the world. It has become a great attractive and revolutionizing force. The world socialist system is showing with every passing day its indisputable superiority over the capitalist system. It has become the shield of all the progressive forces of the world, the impregnable bulwark of freedom and peace, democracy and socialism, the irresistible development of socialism and the upsurge of the national liberation struggle of the peoples inevitably led to the collapse of the colonial slavery system of imperialism. 42 new states with a total population of more than 1 billion and 200 million have won freedom and national independence, while after the First World War the countries enslaved and controlled by imperialism made up more than 77% of the territory of the world and accounted for about 70% of the world population. Now such countries occupy only over 10% of the area and account for about 3% of the world population. The dissolution of the colonial system of imperialism is the second greatest event after the establishment of the world socialist system. As a result of the establishment and consolidation of the world system of socialism, and of the dissolution of the colonial system of imperialism, the sphere of domination of imperialism has been greatly narrowed. Its general crisis has further deepened. All its internal and external class and national contradictions have sharpened. Today imperialism is no more the only ruler and all-powerful ruler in the world. It can no more lord over it. Its laws do not operate everywhere in the world. In front of the capitalist system which is heading towards its inevitable doom, there stands powerful and invincible the world system of socialism round which there have rallied and continue to rally all the revolutionary and anti-imperialist forces which are striving for the national and social liberation. Such is the reality of our days, and this reality convincingly shows that the ratio of forces in the world today has radically and definitely changed to the advantage of socialism and to the detriment of imperialism. The forces of socialism, the forces of national liberation, peace and democracy are superior to the forces of imperialism, colonialism, war and reaction. All these things have created in the world a new situation, very favorable conditions to carry out even more successfully the struggle against imperialism, for peace and for the accomplishment of the socialist, national liberation, democratic and people's revolutions. The Party of Labour of Albania recognizes and understands the deep changes that have taken place in the world, the new conditions and phenomena that have arisen. But we reject all and every attempt being made by the present-day revisionists who, under the slogans of the creative interpretation of Marxism and the new conditions, are spreading their false and opportunistic viewpoints. They are seeking to sell them as a further development of Marxism, and they hasten to stigmatize as dogmatist, sectarian and adventurer anyone who goes on record against such viewpoints. These are known tactics. There is nothing new, nothing original in this, and the revisionists and opportunists, beginning with Bernstein and ending with Tito, under the guise of the changes in the situation and of the new phenomena, have denied the basic principles of Marxism, as V.L. Lenin used to say, by always masking themselves under the slogan of the fight against dogmatism, using the catchword, dogmatist. They have risen against Marxism. From the changes that have occurred in the world, there must be drawn correct, revolutionary, Marxist-Leninist conclusions. There must be drawn such conclusions as not to create reformist and pacifist illusions and weaken the struggle against imperialism, but to strengthen ever more this just struggle. There must be drawn such conclusions as not to alienate the peoples from the cause of revolution, but bring them ever closer to it, not avert them from the struggle for their national liberation, but raise this struggle to an ever higher level. Let us take the problem of war and peace. Does it mean that the change in the balance of power to the advantage of socialism has brought about also a change in the nature of imperialism, that imperialism has been tied up hands and feet, that it is unable to do anything, to unleash wars and undertake various aggressive actions? Such a conclusion is not only erroneous, but also very harmful. The underestimation of the forces of the enemy and the overestimation of our own forces weakens our vigilance and pushes us into dangerous adventures, just as the underestimation of our own forces and the overestimation of the forces of the enemy leads to unprincipled concessions, to mistakes and opportunist attitudes. Proceeding from the real balance of forces in the world today, our party has pointed out and continues to point out that in the question of war and peace both eventualities must be considered, and we must be prepared for both, for war being prevented, as well as for it being unleashed on the part of the imperialists. Our deep conviction that at the present time a world war and other aggressive wars which imperialism unleashes can be prevented is by no means based on the good intentions of the leaders of imperialism, but on the tremendous economic, political and military power of the mighty socialist camp, on the unity and struggle of the international working class, on the resolute efforts of the peoples of the whole world against the imperialist warmongers, on the unity and compactness of all the peace-loving forces. During all the years of the existence of the People's Power, the government of the People's Republic of Albania has resolutely and consistently pursued a foreign policy which has fully met the interests of our people and country, the interests of freedom and national independence, as well as the interests of the whole camp of socialism and of the cause of peace and progress of human society. The foundation of the foreign policy of the Party of Labour of Albania has always been and remains to be constant strengthening of the relations of friendship, fraternal cooperation and mutual support and assistance with the countries of the socialist camp headed by the Soviet Union, support for the national liberation, anti-imperialist and anti-colonial struggle of the oppressed peoples and nations, as well as for the revolutionary struggle of the working people in the capitalist countries, efforts to secure relations of peaceful coexistence of the People's Republic of Albania with the capitalist countries, especially with the neighboring countries, efforts for the preservation and consolidation of peace in the world and in the Balkan and Adriatic area, exposure of the policy of war and aggression pursued by the imperialist powers headed by the United States of America and their partners and tools round our country, such as the Italian imperialists, the Greek monarcho-fascists and the Yugoslav revisionists. In the foreign policy, our party and government have always marched hand in hand with the other socialist countries in their efforts for the preservation and strengthening of the world peace. They have always approved and energetically supported the general line of the foreign policy of the Soviet Union and all the other socialist countries for the settlement of the most important international problems. And this foreign policy of the People's Republic of Albania has always met with the full approval of the Soviet Union and the other socialist countries, which have always considered it as a correct policy to the advantage of our common cause. But of late, and Khrushchev and company turned their coat and are accusing us at times of being adventurists and warmongers and at times of a rapprochement with imperialism. Those who are accusing us, besides slanders and inventions, have no argument, not a single fact to prove that the foreign policy of the People's Republic of Albania has changed. Nothing has changed in our foreign policy. Our attitude also has not changed either in regards the questions of war and peace, or in regards our relations with the other states, and especially with the neighboring states, or in regards the struggle against imperialism and for the exposure of the Yugoslav revisionists. 20 years of life and revolutionary struggle of the Party of Labour of Albania reject all these base slanders and inventions which have caused a profound indignation to and have irritated our people who have heroically fought and continue to fight against imperialism and its henchmen. Those who accuse and slander the Party of Labour of Albania and its leadership are unable to adduce even a single fact that could prove their allegations. While we are in a position to present many documented facts clearly showing their estrangement from the positions of Marxism-Leninism and of the struggle against imperialism, we have never cherished illusions about our enemies, we have not embraced and kissed them, we have not flattered them and we have not caressed them, we have never bowed to them. Our party and government have always maintained a firm, principled, Marxist-Leninist stand towards the enemies of peace and socialism. They have sharply and constantly exposed the imperialists, whether US or British, French or Italian, and their policy of war and aggression. They have been irreconcilable with and have energetically and unreservedly supported the just cause of the peoples who have risen in struggle against imperialism. They have rendered all their support to the fraternal Algerian, Cuban, Congolese, Laotian and other peoples in their sacred struggle against imperialism, resolutely condemning all the aggressive attempts of imperialism. For all this good which our party has done to imperialism during these 20 years, it has been rewarded by it and its tools with a fierce and relentless fight which they have carried out against the People's Republic of Albania through continuous plot and provocations, through diversion, blackmail and successive slanders. They accuse us of being afraid of imperialism, of being afraid to assume responsibility for the settlement of important international questions. By this they mean the conclusion of a peace treaty with Germany and the settlement of the West Berlin problem. The Party of Labour of Albania and the government of the People's Republic of Albania have not feared and never fear imperialism. They have not feared and never fear their responsibility as a socialist country and as a member of the Warsaw Treaty, and they have honorably and strictly fulfilled their internationalist tasks. The attitude of the Party of Labour of Albania and the government of the People's Republic of Albania towards the German issue is known to the whole world. It is contained in many publicly known documents. The Party of Labour of Albania and the government of the People's Republic of Albania have always supported and continue to resolutely support the efforts of the Soviet Union and the German Democratic Republic for a peaceful settlement of the German problem. The viewpoint of our party and government has been and remains that the conclusion of a peace treaty with Germany and the solution on this basis also of the West Berlin problem are indispensable measures, long since ripened in the interests of the People's Republic of Albania, of the German Democratic Republic, of the other socialist countries, in the interests of peace and security in Europe. We have stood and stand for the earliest possible settlement of these problems because any procrastination is only to the advantage of our enemies. The declaration of the Central Committee of the Party of Labour of Albania concerning the German question publicly stated that in any situation and at any dangerous moment we shall fight to the end alongside with the Soviet Union and the other fraternal countries, irrespective of any sacrifice on every occasion, and as always we shall solidarize with them to the end and honorably discharge our duty. Such has been, is and will remain the stand of our party and our government. Then the question arises, who fears indeed, who is afraid of the responsibility for the settlement of the German issue, who is dragging it on? We that have stood and continue to stand for its earliest possible solution, or our accusers who have backed out on this question and have dragged it out from year to year? Or let us take the disarmament problem. It is a matter of common knowledge that our government has supported the Soviet Union's proposal for a total and complete disarmament because as long as the arms exist and the armament race is being conducted, as long as a total and complete disarmament is not effected, there is no security for peace. The Soviet government, jointly with our government, has forwarded the proposal to convert the Adriatic and the Balkans into a peace area, without bases for atomic weapons land rockets. But the proposals of the Soviet Union, and the socialist countries for a total and complete disarmament and for the creation of peace areas have been rejected by the imperialist powers. In such conditions our government has supported and fully supports the Soviet government's decision on the resumption of the nuclear weapon tests as a very important and indispensable measure for the security of the Soviet Union and the whole socialist camp, for bridling the imperialist powers headed by the United States of America and the Bonn revenge seekers, who have intensified to the maximum the frenzied armaments race and the feverish preparations for a new world war. We are aware that disarmament is a difficult problem. To force its solution upon the imperialists, great efforts must be made as well as resolute struggle must be waged by the socialist countries and all the peace-loving forces. But Khrushchev, instead of pursuing such a correct path, is seeking to disarm a socialist country such as the People's Republic of Albania, which is encircled on all parts by enemies. By weakening the defensive might of the People's Republic of Albania he damages not only the interests of our country, but also those of the entire camp of socialism, and all this is done at a time when the U.S. Sixth Fleet is roaming about like a monster in the Mediterranean, when U.S. rocket bases have been established in Greece and Italy, when the NATO forces are feverishly continuing their armaments race, when the imperialists and revenge seekers of West Germany are sabotaging and seriously endangering the world peace. The Albanian government was not guilty of and bore no responsibility for this, but, at any case Khrushchev should by no means go to such lengths as to openly incite the imperialists and various reactionaries against a socialist country such as the People's Republic of Albania. However, the defense of the Albanian borders is fully ensured, in conditions when there exist in the world states with different social systems. The only just principle to govern the relations between them is the principle of peaceful coexistence, a principle outlined by Lenin and implemented also by Stalin. Our Party of Labor has always thought and thinks that the policy of peaceful coexistence meets the vital interests of all the peoples, both of the socialist and capitalist countries. It meets the aim of the further strengthening of the positions of socialism and universal peace. Therefore, this principle underlies the relations of our socialist state with the other non-socialist states. It is absurd to accuse our party and socialist state of allegedly standing against peaceful coexistence. This slander is refuted by the entire practical activity of our state in the field of foreign policy. We are not opposed to the principle of peaceful coexistence, but we do not agree with some opportunist viewpoints of Khrushchev and his followers who consider the peaceful coexistence as the general line of foreign policy of the socialist countries, as the main road to the victory of socialism on a world scale, who for the sake of peaceful coexistence renounce the struggle for the exposure of imperialism, who negate almost completely the ideological and political struggle against the Yugoslav revisionism under the pretext that in some foreign policy issues Yugoslavia supports the Soviet proposals. Such an interpretation of peaceful coexistence is erroneous and anti-Marxist because it leads to the denial of the class struggle. The correct implementation of the policy of peaceful coexistence, implying also the exposure of imperialism and its policy of war and aggression, must promote the development of the struggle of the working class of the capitalist countries, as well as the national liberation movement in the colonial independent countries. On their part, the successes of the revolutionary class and national liberation struggle, by narrowing and weakening the positions of imperialism, promote the cause of peace and peaceful coexistence. The communist parties in the capitalist countries, parallel with the struggle to force the policy of peaceful coexistence on the bourgeois governments of their countries, are waging at the same time the class struggle for the overthrow of the bourgeois power, for the transition to socialism according to the specific conditions of every country. As regards the forms of transition to socialism, Khrushchev badly complicated this question, too, at the 20th Congress and later. He almost raised to absolute the peaceful way of the seizure of power by the working class, and thus the illusion was created that allegedly the working class and its communist party would be able to take power in their hands only by securing a parliamentary majority. Such theses were approved only by the revisionists and various opportunists who used them to justify their anti-Marxist viewpoints. We, the Albanian communists, have never been and are not a priori opposed to the peaceful way, but the teachings of Marxism-Leninism, the historical experience and the reality of the present days teach us that, to secure the victory of the cause of socialism, the working class and its party must prepare themselves simultaneously for both eventualities, the peaceful way and the non-peaceful one. To take one's bearings only from one of these eventualities it means to embark on an erroneous path. Only by getting well prepared, especially for the non-peaceful way, the chances grow also for the peaceful way. This is how we understand the peaceful coexistence and its connection with the class struggle. This is how we understand and implement the policy of peaceful coexistence with the other non-socialist states, and in the first place with our neighbors. It is strange that Nikita Khrushchev and his followers demand from us that we should put into effect the peaceful coexistence with our Greek neighbors. They accuse us of not marching along the same road with them as regards the proposals for the disarmament of the Balkan countries. They accuse us of not making efforts for a Balkan understanding. They join the chorus of Tito and Karamanlis that we are allegedly two warmongers of the Balkans at a time when Greece continues to to consider herself in a state of war with Albania, when she advances territorial claims towards our country and is plotting to attack Albania, when monarcho-fascist Greece has become a fortress armed to the teeth by the American imperialists against our socialist countries. The charges of our criticizers are groundless, for no reasonable man can think that little Albania, encircled as she is by wolves which for 17 years in succession have sought to swallow her alive, does not stand for peace and disarmament. How much monarcho-fascist Greece disarmed and to what extent the hopes of those believing in such a thing were realized, this is a matter of common knowledge. It is shown by life, but that we should avoid criticizing Nikita Khrushchev, and this criticism was made by us in a comradely way, when he gives hopes to Sophocles Venizelos for an autonomy of South Albania. This would be a treason on our part. Nikita Khrushchev did not like our just criticism. This is the least evil. But he turned our criticism into a countercharge, accusing us of allegedly slandering the Soviet Union, which has liberated us and is defending us. This, of course, is Machiavellian. But later the devil showed again his horns. At the time when the Americans, Greeks and Turks were carrying out their large-scale military maneuvers around the borders of Albania and Bulgaria, and Khrushchev, in his statement to the New York Times reporter, Sulzberger, on September 1, 1961, textually said, "You, Americans have established bases also in Greece and you are threatening from there our ally Bulgaria. Has not perhaps monarcho-fascist Greece installed rockets also against Albania? How long is it that Nikita Khrushchev has decided that Albania should be no more an ally of the Soviet Union? This is monstrous. Are these unimportant questions? Is it permissible to the first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and the Prime Minister of the Soviet Union, even if he and Socialist Albania were at daggers drawn, to openly tell the Greek reaction that Socialist Albania is no more an ally of the Soviet Union and inform President Kennedy that the relations between the Soviet Union and Albania have deteriorated? It is we, therefore, according to some, that view things as sectarian nationalists, while others, who speculate on the interests of our people, are Marxists. Tomorrow, these same criticizers may hold us responsible also for the losses in election of the Greek Progressive Party IDA. Do perhaps the self-styled Marxists think that we should hand the keys of our country to the Greek monarcho-fascists so that their line of peaceful coexistence may win, or the seizure of power in Greece in a peaceful and parliamentary way may be achieved? No, they should not expect this from us. These self-styled Marxists should not forget that the Party of Labour of Albania and the Albanian people have shown their great internationalism by saving tens of thousands of heroes of the Greek people and of the Greek Communist Party who, we are certain, do not spit the horse after having crossed the river. Such is the foreign policy that has been pursued by our party and our government. Such are our viewpoints about the problems of the present-day world development. It is precisely for these attitudes and these viewpoints that we are criticized. It is for this that Khrushchev attacked us at the 22nd Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. In this way, he first, unilaterally, made public our disputes, providing weapons to the enemy and assuming thereby a heavy historic responsibility as a splitter of the unity of the international communist movement and of the socialist camp. Our Party of Labour has never publicly expressed our differences. It has dwelt on them only at party meetings. But now that Khrushchev made them public, our party, too, is obliged to state openly its viewpoints. And Khrushchev, accusing our party in his speeches at the 22nd Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, said that the Albanian-Soviet relations were spoiled for the fault of the Albanian leaders. It is well known that the 20 years of revolutionary activity of our party are 20 years of a tremendous work for the promotion of friendship between the Albanian people and the Soviet peoples, for the establishment of closer fraternal ties between the People's Republic of Albania and the Soviet Union. They are 20 years of exemplary cooperation between our party and the glorious Communist Party of the Soviet Union. 20 years of the activity of our party are 20 years of sincere faithfulness, of great fraternal love of our party for Lenin's great party, which has always been, is and will remain for us a source of inspiration and experience, from which we have learned and shall learn how to work and strive for the good of our peoples, for the cause of socialism and communism. 20 years of the activity of our party have been years of an unspared and all-round assistance by the Soviet Union to the Albanian people, of a fraternal internationalist aid, which our party and government have rightly utilized for the economic development of our country, for the upbuilding of socialism in Albania, for the improvement of the living standards of the Albanian people. In such conditions it is absurd and incredible to everyone to allege that it is the Albanian leaders who without any reason and with an amazing quickness have changed their attitude towards the Soviet Union, towards the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Incredible is also the monstrous slander that the Albanian leaders have allegedly linked themselves to imperialism and have allegedly sold themselves to it for 30 pieces of silver. Such discoveries may be believed by those who are fond of tales and detective novels, but by no serious man. For every honest person who knows somewhat the 20-year-old history of our party cannot fail to see that such a slander is not justified by any stand of our party, by any action of its leaders. The Party of Labour of Albania, during its entire revolutionary path, has always fought and continues to fight with determination against imperialism and its agents. Never in the past, at present and in the future has it stretched, is stretching or will stretch its hand to anybody for pittance, and less so to imperialism and its allies. It has received and receives from its friends and brothers of the countries of the socialist camp not arms, but only internationalist aids and credit, and it will continue to receive in the future, too, only from those socialist countries which will desire to offer to it such an aid. We ask for alms from nobody if Khrushchev and his followers, for one or another reason, do not like to help us. They are expecting us in vain to address ourselves to the imperialists and their allies for alms. Our people have friends and comrades in the socialist countries who have not abandoned and will not abandon them. But, regardless of this, we tell Enver Khrushchev that the Albanian people and their party of labor will live even on grass, if need be, but they will never sell themselves for 30 pieces of silver, for they prefer to die standing and with honor rather than live with shame and knelt down. Why then did the Soviet-Albanian relations deteriorate? This is clear and well known to Enver Khrushchev himself and to the international communist movement. Khrushchev knows the cause, for he himself is the culprit. We shall say only this, that the June 1960 Bucharest meeting was the starting point. Differences had existed between our Party of Labor and the Soviet leadership even prior to June 1960, on some questions of ideological and political nature. However, they have not exerted any negative influence on the relations between our two socialist states, between our two Marxist-Leninist parties. The Party of Labor of Albania has always declared, and declares now, too, that the experience of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the experience of its congresses, including here also the 20th and the 22nd Congresses, have been, are and will always be a great help on our road for the upbuilding of the socialist and communist society. However, as regards some special theses of principle of the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, our party has not been and is not of the same opinion with the Soviet leadership, just as it is not also at present as regards some special questions of the 22nd Congress or the new program of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union approved by the 22nd Congress. Is not our party entitled to this? Is this not consistent with the teachings of Marxism, Leninism and proletarian internationalism? Can this be considered as an anti-Soviet attitude, as they are trying to accuse us? The Soviet leaders consider us anti-Marxist, dogmatist, sectarian, and opposed to proletarian internationalism, etc. Any party that is not of the same opinion with them as regards some theses of principle which were raised at the 20th Congress. Moreover, the former member of the Presidium of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, E. Furtseva, went to such lengths as to declare from the rostrum of the 22nd Congress that how can call themselves communists those persons who do not accept the decisions of the 20th Congress of our party. Although we say that we do not agree with some theses of the 20th Congress, the Soviet leaders like to round out things and say the whole 20th Congress. That is, according to some Soviet leaders, the criterion of loyalty towards Marxism-Leninism, towards communism and proletarian internationalism, is allegedly the attitude towards the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Can such logic be Marxist? If all the communist and workers' parties in the world would adopt the new criteria invented by Furtseva, then only the disagreement, let us say, with many revisionist theses of the 8th Congress of the Italian Communist Party would throw into misfortune millions of communists in the world, and difficulties would be created for them, for they would not know to what address they should hand their party cards. According to the Leninist principles governing the relations between Marxist parties, however important the Congress of a party may be, however great and authoritative the party of a country may be, the decisions of its Congress are binding only for its members. In the international communist movement, all the parties, the Moscow Declaration points out, are equal and independent. They work out their policies proceeding from the specific conditions of their countries and guiding themselves by the principles of Marxism-Leninism. The attempt to make the decisions of the Congress of a party as international norms binding for all the parties is a crude violation of the principles of equality and independence of the Marxist-Leninist parties. It is in open contrast with proletarian internationalism. Therefore, it is not our party, but the Soviet leadership, headed by Enver Khrushchev, that has deviated from the positions of Marxism-Leninism and proletarian internationalism, seeking to force its course upon the other parties, demanding from them to renounce their own viewpoints and obey and submit to them, whether our party stands or not on the positions of Marxism-Leninism. This is by no means determined by its critical attitude towards some theses expressed by the leaders of some fraternal parties, nor by the subjective evaluation that may be made of its line and activity by Enver Khrushchev and his followers. The criterion of truth is life, practice. Therefore the individuals in the various parties should be judged by the facts, by their practical activity, the path traversed by the Party of Labor of Albania, the line it has pursued right from its founding, its 20-year-old political activity, are the most convincing facts attesting to its firm loyalty towards Marxism-Leninism, towards the great cause of socialism and communism, as well as towards the cause of the world peace. Our Party of Labor has made its special remarks about some theses of principle of the 20th Congress and about some stands of the Soviet leaders, with which it has not agreed, through normal party channels, observing thereby all the jointly established principles governing the relations between the fraternal parties. As regards our remarks relating to the foreign policy, and the problems of the present-day world development, we mention them above. Let us now see another important problem about which we have held and continue to hold opinions different from those of the Soviet leaders. The question is about the attitude towards J.V. Stalin and his work according to the views of our party, and Khrushchev had to uncrown first J.V. Stalin and his work in order to forward his opportunist theses to the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and spread them later. He did this by his special report delivered at the 20th Congress concerning the personality cult and its consequences. Our party has not agreed and does not agree with the criticism against Stalin, as it was affected at the 20th Congress and later, and Khrushchev, slandering our party at the 22nd Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and crudely interfering with our domestic affairs, said that the Albanian leaders were against the criticism of Stalin's personality cult because the personality cult methods are allegedly thriving in our party, that terror and injustice are allegedly reigning in Albania. We shall not stop here to reject these slanders, but the fact that their author has fallen so low as to mobilize the public opinion against our party using such arguments borrowed from the most rabid enemies of socialism and communism, shows his dark aims. It is evident that by linking at the 22nd Congress his unsubstantiated attacks on the Party of Labour of Albania with his fight against Stalin's cult and the anti-party group N, Khrushchev aimed at showing the analogy between the alleged Albanian Stalinism and the epic of the Stalinist crimes in the Soviet Union, in order to create in this way the atmosphere he needed at the Congress and in the world public opinion to make his slanders more credible. The Party of Labour of Albania has always taken and continues to take account of the teachings of Marxism, Leninism concerning the role of the masses, classes, party and leaders. It has always considered and continues to consider the manifestation of the personality cult as phenomenon alien to Marxism-Leninism, harmful to a communist and workers' party. Our party has not hesitated, when the case has been, to criticize while still in embryo the various manifestations of this kind among its ranks as it did at its third Congress. Likewise, our party, when the case has been, has boldly fought and has nipped in the bud any violation of the revolutionary legality, any abuse of the state power by anybody, as it did at its first Congress. Everybody knows what was the fate of the enemy of the party and people Kochizok and Company, who before the year 1948, incited by the Yugoslav revisionists and abusing the trust given to them by the people and party, violated the state laws in order to dig the grave to the party and state cotters. There does not exist in our party either the sickness of the personality cult or the violation of the socialist legality, but at the same time, while guarding itself against the manifestations of the personality cult, our party, in a correct Marxist-Leninist way, nourished love and respect for its leaders, strictly observing the socialist legality. Our party and our people's power severe towards the enemies of our people's republic, towards all those who seek to bury the historic victories of our people. The Party of Labour of Albania, therefore, has been and is opposed to the criticism done to J.V. Stalin at the 20th Congress and which was repeated also at the 22nd Congress for some other reasons of principle. According to the viewpoint of our party, J.V. Stalin, in his entire theoretical and practical activity, has been and remains one of the most distinguished leaders and personalities not only of the Soviet Union and the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, but also of the international communist and workers' movement, one of the most ardent defenders and greatest theoreticians of Marxism, Leninism. His great historic merit lies in the fact that for many years in succession he had been a loyal disciple and determined comrade in arms of V.L. Lenin in the struggle for the overthrow of Tsarism and the triumph of the Great October Socialist Revolution. While following Lenin's death, heading the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, he faithfully defended Leninism against the rabid attacks by the Trotskyites, Bukharinites, Zinovivites and other enemies and routed them ideologically and politically. J.V. Stalin, as the main leader of the party, made a great contribution to the successful direction of the construction of socialism in the Soviet Union and the Great Patriotic War of the Soviet Union against fascism. He further developed Marxism, Leninism in a series of important questions of the Soviet Socialist Society and the construction of socialism and communism. He made a valuable contribution to the consolidation of the socialist camp in the international communist movement, as well as to the exposure of modern revisionism in the person of Tito's revisionist traitorous group. By thus appraising J.V. Stalin's activity, there is no doubt that the errors he may have committed during the last years of his life were partial and they cannot serve as a criterion to make a general evaluation of J.V. Stalin's person and his activity. In the general evaluation of J.V. Stalin's activity, in the foreground stand his great merits, his fight for the defense of Leninism, his struggle for the construction of socialism in the Soviet Union, his struggle for the creation and consolidation of the socialist camp, for the strengthening of the unity of the international communist and workers' movement, his consistent fight against imperialism, his policy for the defense of peace and the peaceful coexistence. They constitute his main characteristic feature as a leader and as a communist. Such has been and remains the firm position of the Party of Labour of Albania relating to the evaluation of J.V. Stalin's work. And Khrushchev's wrong position in his criticism against J.V. Stalin lies in the fact that he unilaterally and tendentiously exaggerated beyond measure J.V. Stalin's mistakes, going even to such lengths as to make base slanders against him. Stalin was presented by him almost as an enemy of the Soviet Union and communism. He was characterized as brutal, capricious, as a despot, bloodthirsty and criminal towards the party cotters and the loyal and tested revolutionaries, and as a dupe of the imperialists and fascists, as a murderer. Man who committed great follies both in practice and theoretical questions, who did not understand of what was being done in the Soviet Union, who manifested a lack of respect towards Lenin's memory and many other charges of this kind. The detached statements made at the 20th Congress and after it, to the effect that Stalin remains a distinguished Marxist-Leninist, etc., are entirely formal and were made to mitigate the bad impression and the lawful anger aroused in the communists of the whole world by these accusations against Stalin. In fact, neither at the 20th Congress nor up to today the leadership of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and its propaganda has made no positive appraisal of J.V. Stalin's theoretical legacy to show his positive sides and his contribution to the defense and further development of Marxism-Leninism. This inhumane attitude reached its climax at the 22nd Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, where not only were repeated the accusations of the 20th Congress, this time publicly, but there was adopted also a special decision to remove J.V. Stalin's embalmed body from the mausoleum. Unable to reject Stalin by arguments of principle in the field of theoretical activity and creativeness, Khrushchev, in order to fight Stalin, introduces the question into the police and espionage field, and he took measures also for the liquidation of Stalin's corpse. How much hypocritically sound, following all these actions, N. Khrushchev's words pronounced in January 1957, to the effect that when it was the question of the revolution, of the defense of the interests of the class of the proletariat, in the revolutionary struggle against our class enemies, Stalin defended bravely and irreconcilably the cause of Marxism-Leninism, that in the main and fundamental thing for the Marxist-Leninists is the defense of working class interests, of the cause of socialism, the fight against the enemies of Marxism-Leninism in this main and fundamental thing, as it is said, pray God every communist be able to fight as Stalin fought B. N. Khrushchev, at the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet propaganda following that Congress, unilaterally treated the question of the fight against the personality cult, throwing into oblivion the Leninist doctrine about the relations among the masses, classes, parties and leaders. The great Lenin, especially in his book of Genius Leftism, Infantile Sickness and Communism, i.e. left-wing communism and infantile disorder, forcefully pointed out the indispensability of the creation, in every Marxist party, of a group of leaders, more or less permanent, composed of the most authoritative, most influential and most experienced persons. Without such a stable leadership the struggle of the working class and its Communist Party cannot be crowned with success. In contrast with these clear teachings of Lenin, at the 20th Congress, under the pretext of the fight against the personality cult, the mass democracy was contraposed to the role of the leaders. It is not bad to recall what V. L. Lenin writes in connection with this. To arrive for this reason at such a point as to oppose in general the dictatorship of the masses to the dictatorship of the leaders, is an absurdity and a folly. It is especially ridiculous when you see that the old leaders who had human viewpoints about simple things, are indeed replaced, under the mask of the slogan, "Down with the leaders," by young leaders who say nonsenses which weigh nothing. V. L. Lenin, Works, Volume 31, p. 31, Albanian ed. And Khrushchev and his group used for their own anti-Marxist aims, and this is becoming ever more clear, the alleged principal criticism against Stalin's personality cult, how he used it and for what purposes he is acting in the internal plan, in the Soviet Union and in the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. This is not our business. This may be judged only by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Despite this, we can but note that in fact Khrushchev, dealing with the crimes that have been committed in Stalin's epoch, with the murders of the innocent people, with the elimination of thousands of cadres, through false court trials, with a regime of terror which is described with an unbridled enthusiasm, in the darkest colors, making all these things known to the international public opinion, is rendering a very bad service to the Soviet Union, pleasing only the imperialists and all the enemies of communism. And Khrushchev has accused the leadership of our party of the just criticism, also at party meetings, against some unlawful actions with regard to our country, alleging that the Albanian leaders throw mud at the Soviet Union. But how should we call this same unbridled zeal of his to darken a whole glorious epoch, the epoch of the construction of socialism in the Soviet Union, to discredit before the eyes of the whole world the glory of the Soviet Union, presenting it as the country where terror and murders have allegedly reigned, just as the whole reactionary bourgeois press has propagandized and is propagandizing? Is it not he himself that, by his actions, discrediting the Soviet Union, is he not gravely offending the heroism of the Soviet peoples who, in struggle with internal and external enemies, in struggle with countless difficulties and obstacles, under the leadership of their Communist Party which was led by Stalin, laid the foundations of the socialist and communist society in the Soviet Union, when he proposes that there should be erected in Moscow a memorial to the victims of the personality cult? Someone calls such actions a bold self-criticism. Let them think more deeply about how much good and how many evils has this kind of bold self-criticism brought to the Soviet Union and the communist movement. And Khrushchev, speaking of the iniquities and victims of the period of the personality cult, declaring the various court trials as framed up, regardless of the fact that in all that struggle there might have been made also some mistakes, appears to be consistent with his anti-Marxist concepts about imperialism and its servitors. Indeed, he rendered a service to imperialism, for he presents it as not dangerous to the countries which are building up socialism. He is weakening the vigilance of the peoples in their struggle against the espionage network of imperialism which has acted and is fiercely acting against the socialist camp. And Khrushchev adopted his tactics of silence also towards the plot organized by the Yugoslav revisionists, the Greek monarcho-fascist and the United States Sixth Fleet, a plot which was exposed in our country a few months ago. Moreover, after having recommended these tactics also to some other fraternal parties, he spread the slogan that the plot was an invention, that the participants in this plot were patriots and honest fighters whom later, at the 22nd Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. In his concluding speech, he openly took them under his protection, while not long ago when Khrushchev formally accused the Albanian leaders of being connected with the imperialist espionage. Therefore, according to his logic, it follows that he who fights against imperialism, he who fights against its agents, he who fights for the defense of the freedom and independence of the socialist homeland, is an agent of imperialism. And conversely, he who rises against the people's power in the party, he who places himself at the service of the enemies of socialism, is a martyr. A good patriot. He is taken under protection by the leader of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. To such persons there will be erected memorials also. The question of the fight against Stalin's cult has been used by Khrushchev to uncrown Leninism, to prepare the ground to revise Marxism, Leninism, and spread his opportunist views in the most important questions of the present-day world development and the international communist movement. This action and the tactics of his are neither new nor original. In fact, in his fight against Leninism, Trotsky, too, used the same tactics. Trotsky in his writings J.V. Stalin says makes one more attempt to prepare the conditions for the substitution of Trotskyism to Leninism. Trotsky has to discredit, at all costs, the party, its cadres that carried out the uprising with a view to passing from the discredit of the party to the discredit of Leninism, while he needs the discredit of Leninism to smuggle in Trotskyism as the only proletarian ideology. Don't take it for a joke. All this is certainly, yes, certainly, done under the banner of Leninism, so that the procedure of this smuggling should be carried out without any damage at all. J.V. Stalin, Works, Volume 6, p.361, Albanian ed. And Khrushchev used Stalin's question to strike on the healthy Marxist-Leninist elements in the leaderships of the communist and workers' parties of the different countries, to scare, and in case of resistance, also to liquidate anyone who would dare to object, to reduce to silence the other parties and various leaders who would not support his revisionist views. His course, the question of the personality cult, in short, was used as a bugbear to exercise pressure on the other parties and to liquidate the leaders who were not to the liking of Khrushchev. These aims which, but recently, were concealed by him, covering them with a principled and Marxist phraseology, were openly stated at the 22nd Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Khrushchev said in his speech, to put an end to the personality cult means for Enver Hoxha and others to renounce in essence the commanding posts in the party and state, and added that such a thing they do not want to do if we take account of the fact that in the same speech he, as we mentioned above, takes under protection and considers as patriots the anti-party elements and agents of imperialism, participants in the plot organized by the imperialists against the People's Republic of Albania. Then clearly follows in Khrushchev's principal fight against the personality cult in Albania. His great concern, he is seeking to liquidate the present-day leaders of our party and place in their stead the anti-party elements and any plotter, agent of imperialism, that in Khrushchev, under the pretext of the fight against the personality cult, is seeking to uncrown Leninism in order to pave the way to revisionism, is known also by the fact that he is by no means concerned with the just and principled, Marxist-Leninist fight against the personality cult. For, if such were the case, irrespective of his demagogical words, he could not have helped noticing that at present in the Soviet Union, manifestations of the personality cult are appearing with every passing day and even in more open and exalting forms for his own person. Thus, one can hardly find an issue of the Soviet Illustrated Reviews in which one will not find pictures of Khrushchev. The pages of the Soviet press are full of quotations from his speeches. He is the only one to speak in all parts and about all questions. A whole film is devoted to his life, and other films to his visits to various countries of the world. Numerous praises are made to him in various speeches and writings attributing to him personally the greatest successes of the Soviet people in the field of the development of industry, science and technology. Great, feverish efforts are being exerted to present Khrushchev not only as a great military strategist but also almost as an architect of the victory over fascism in the Second World War. Where does then lie Khrushchev's respect for principles in the fight against the manifestations of the personality cult, which he so noisily advertises in his unprincipled fight against the other fraternal parties and their leaders? This is why, comrades, our party has not agreed and does not agree with the Soviet leadership in the question of their criticism towards Stalin. Our Party of Labor has not agreed and does not agree with the Soviet leadership also as regards the question of the attitude towards the present-day revisionism, and especially towards the traitorous clique of the Yugoslav revisionists. And Khrushchev and his group used Stalin's issue and the issue of the personality cult also to prepare the ground for the complete rehabilitation of Tito's revisionist and traitorous clique, to present it is a victim of Stalin's errors, encouraging thereby the revisionist renegades, wherever they are, to begin their activity against Marxism-Leninism under the demagogical slogans of anti-Stalinism etc. It is known that Tito's revisionist clique was publicly condemned both by the known letters of the Central Committee of the Communist Party Bolsheviks of the Soviet Union, signed by J.V. Stalin and V.M. Molotov, and by the June 1948 resolution of the Information Bureau of some communist and workers' parties concerning the situation in the Communist Party of Yugoslavia, which was later supported by all the communist and workers' parties of the world. Later on, in November 1949, a second resolution of the Information Bureau was issued stating that the Tito clique had finally degenerated into an espionage center of imperialism, that it had liquidated the gains of the revolution in Yugoslavia, that it had diverted Yugoslavia from the road to socialism and the socialist camp and placed her on the economic and political dependence of imperialism, that the Tito gang waged a broad-scale activity of espionage and plots against the various socialist countries, that it supported in different forms the imperialist policy of war and aggression, etc. The viewpoint of the Party of Labour of Albania has been and remains that the conclusions of Stalin and the Information Bureau in connection with the renegade, revisionist clique of Tito, have been and remain correct. These conclusions have been borne out and are being borne out both by the Yugoslav reality at the time and the later and present-day events. The Yugoslav revisionists became the center of diversion and plots at the imperialist service against the countries of the socialist camp. Under their direction was working in Albania Hoxha Audiobook's gang, which aimed at destroying the Party of Labour and at liquidating the people's power. From Tito's Yugoslavia were illegally smuggled in the socialist countries hundreds and thousands of agents and provocateurs, spies and diversionists, whose duty was terror, sabotage, hatching up of plots against socialism in these countries. Tito's revisionists clique has more and more openly since 1948 and on, placed itself at the service of the U.S. imperialism, with which, it is linked with the millions and billions of dollars in the form of U.S. economic and military credits to Yugoslavia, with which it is linked by the participation in the Balkan Pact, which is nothing else but an appendage to the Atlantic Pact, with which it is linked by the policy of diversion and plots against the socialist countries and the national liberation movement of the newly liberated peoples or of those still suffering under the clutches of colonialism. Until 1955, all the communist and workers' parties were unanimous in condemning the Yugoslav revisionist leadership and were waging a firm and principled ideological political struggle against it. However, precisely at that time when Khrushchev announced that towards Yugoslavia and her leaders had allegedly been done a great injustice, that under the influence of the agent Beria groundless charges had been leveled against them that in the Yugoslav issue, too, J.V. Stalin had allegedly made a serious mistake, and immediately he took the initiative, went to Belgrade, where he called Tito dear comrade threw to the basket one-sidedly the resolution of the Information Bureau and loudly announced that Yugoslavia is a socialist country and that the Yugoslav leaders, although they have some wavering, are in general Marxist-Leninists. What does the experience? What does the life show? The experience and life both before and after 1955 show that in the assessment of the Yugoslav question Stalin and the Information Bureau were right, because their assessment rested on objective facts, on the teachings of Marxism-Leninism. The experience and the practical life, on the other hand, show that in their stand towards Tito's revisionist clique and Khrushchev and those who follow him are not right, because their actions are based on subjective viewpoints and are contrary to the teachings of Marxism-Leninism, contrary to the objective reality. Let us refer to facts. What have been the results of the efforts to rehabilitate the Tito clique? The Yugoslav revisionist leaders have given up neither their anti-Marxist viewpoints nor their hostile activity against the socialist camp and the fraternal communist and workers' parties. The most obvious result brought about by Khrushchev's efforts was the fact that after 1955, possibilities were created for the gang of Yugoslav renegades to act more freely against the world communist movement and the countries of the socialist camp under the guise of the persecuted comrade, exploiting in this direction even the patronage of the first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The rehabilitation of the Yugoslav revisionists brought with it also the rehabilitation of all their agents and companions in some fraternal parties where, under the mask of correcting the mistakes, a true campaign started against the sound cadres of the party and an activation of all the anti-party elements. This happened in some parties of the socialist countries in Europe, as well as in some parties of the capitalist countries. The most typical in this direction are the events of Hungary, where the activation of the revisionist elements, headed by Imre Nagy, who had the active support and instigation of the Yugoslav revisionists, led up to the outbreak of the counter-revolution, which put in danger the very existence of Hungary as a people's democratic state. In spite of this, Khrushchev continuously, with great confidence in Tito and his companions, pursued insistently the policy of rapprochement, flatteries and caresses with the Yugoslav revisionists. The events of Hungary show still more clearly this stand. When the counter-revolution started in Hungary, it was clear to everybody that in the Hungarian events a base role was being played by the Yugoslav revisionists. This was seen in their influence in the counter-revolutionary discussions of the Pitofi Club. This was seen during the counter-revolutionary uprising and the enthusiasm expressed by the Yugoslav revisionists at that time. But it was still more clearly seen also in the fact that the traitor Imre Nagy, after the smashing of the counter-revolution, found asylum at the Yugoslav embassy in Budapest. Instead of mercilessly unmasking the Belgrade renegades as direct inspirers of the counter-revolutionary coup in Hungary, Khrushchev tried in every way to mitigate their responsibility, to minimize it and, finally, to eliminate it entirely. The former ambassador of the Soviet Union at that time in Albania, L.L. Krylov, communicated to the Central Committee of the Party of Labour of Albania the letter that Khrushchev had sent on November 9, 1956 to J.B. Tito. In this letter, among other things, Khrushchev wrote to Tito the following: "The Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union has examined your last letter. We consider it possible to agree with your viewpoints that no special importance should be given now to the question whether the Yugoslav embassy in Budapest has acted correctly or not by giving asylum to Imre Nagy and his companions. We are noting with satisfaction that since the Bryanite talks you have been in full agreement with our stand towards Comrade János Kadar as a distinguished personality and with revolutionary authority in Hungary, capable in these difficult moments and conditions to head the new revolutionary government. You are fully satisfied with the fact the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, since the summer of this year, in connection with the departure of Rákosi, was trying that Comrade Kadar should become first secretary of the Central Committee of the Hungarian Working People's Party. Any comment in connection with this letter is superfluous. This letter shows very clearly that the first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, trampling underfoot any regulation determining the relations between the fraternal parties, has gone so far as to interfere even in an issue of so important and markedly internal party character, as is the appointment in the place of the first secretary of a fraternal party of this or that person. It shows also very clearly that Khrushchev has been long since in full agreement with J.B. Tito, that he has deemed it reasonable that for everything, even for the appointment of the first secretary of another party, to consult J.B. Tito, this enemy of socialism, the very inspirer and organizer of the counter-revolution in Hungary. From this it is clearly understood and is entirely logical why Khrushchev tried to see the question of the Yugoslav intervention in the Hungarian events closed, because two things cannot be done simultaneously, both to consult Tito and to expose Tito. After Tito's notorious speech in Pula in November 1956, the struggle of the communist and workers' parties against the Yugoslav revisionism was enlivened and the Yugoslav leaders were criticized for their stand. But the traitorous Tito group not only did not make any self-criticism or any positive step towards the communist movement, but in 1958 it considered it convenient to formulate and sum up its revisionist ideas in the program of the Yugoslav Communist League, which was published as a counterweight to the Moscow Declaration of the Communist and Workers' Parties of November 1957. It seemed already as if there was no more room even for the least illusion, because Tito and his group had openly written in their program what they were hiding for years under demagogical pseudo-Marxist and pseudo-socialist slogans. But what did happen? At the beginning, Khrushchev, who felt himself embarrassed before the public opinion and the international communist movement, although half-heartedly, took a stand concerning the Yugoslav revisionists. But this did not last long. With a wonderful nimbleness and contrary to the most elementary logic, he, at the 5th Congress of the Socialist United Party of Germany in July 1, gave the orientation not to speak of the Yugoslav revisionists, by saying, "In our struggle for the common questions we should not devote to the Yugoslav revisionists more attention than they deserve. They want that their value should be raised, that people should think that they are the center of the world. We will not help in fanning the passions. In aggravating the relations, even, in the situation created in our relations with the Yugoslav Communist League, it will be useful to retain a spark of hope, to seek acceptable forms for some questions." He stressed this also during his visit in Albania in May 1959. At the same time, again started to circulate more and more often the word on Comrade Tito propaganda started again that Yugoslavia is a socialist state, that between the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia there exists mutual understanding on many problems of the foreign policy. It is appropriate to recall that V.L. Lenin in his time has waged an irreconcilable fight not only against opportunism, but also against those who preach the unity with the opportunists. The revisionist group of the Yugoslav leadership, being left unmolested in the treacherous, anti-socialist and plotting work, continued with a greater intensity their activity, both to split the communist movement and to undermine the national liberation and anti-imperialist movement of the peoples fighting for freedom, or that have just won their national freedom. With every passing day the Yugoslav revisionists showed themselves enemies of communism and of the people's freedom, precisely because Tito's revisionist gang is such. The representatives of 81 fraternal communist and workers' parties resolutely condemned in the 1960 Moscow Declaration the Yugoslav revisionist leaders. As it is known, the declaration stresses that the Yugoslav leaders, having betrayed Marxism-Leninism, detached their country from the socialist camp, put it under the dependence of the so-called aid of the U.S. and other imperialists, and in this way created the danger of losing the revolutionary gains reached with the heroic struggle of the Yugoslav people. That the Yugoslav revisionists are carrying out an undermining activity against the socialist camp and the international communist movement. That under the pretext of the policy of non-alignment they conduct an activity which brings harm to the question of the unity of all the peace-loving forces and states. Finally, the declaration stresses the need for a continuous struggle to expose fully the group of Yugoslav leaders. However, after November 1960, in the majority of occasions, these correct theses of the declaration were thrown into oblivion by the Soviet leadership. More than that, as if to encourage Tito's revisionist clique to appease its resentment, Soviet leaders saw it reasonable to make warm official statements at the address of the Yugoslav comrades. Thus, only a few days after the issuing of the declaration of the 81 fraternal parties, the member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party and Foreign Minister of the Soviet Union Gromyko, at the Supreme Soviet of the Soviet Union, on December 23, 1960, stated that in some fundamental things the foreign policy of the Soviet Union is fully compatible with the foreign policy of Yugoslavia, while Khrushchev himself, in an interview to the Observer of the New York Times Sulzberger, published by Pravda on September 1, 1961, stated, "Of course, we consider Yugoslavia a socialist country is such a statement not contrary to the declaration of the 81 fraternal Communist and Workers' parties, should it not be thought that the first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, with this statement was aiming at appeasing the resentment of the Yugoslav revisionist leaders and at making to them publicly known that what is written in the Moscow Declaration, or also in some other document of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, is formal, while his viewpoints are other? Why is such a thing happening? Why is with such a persistence being held such a benevolent stand towards a gang of renegades of Marxism-Leninism, submerged head and feet in the scum of revisionism and of treachery and, at the same time, are being rabidly attacked the Communist and Workers, parties which have always stood loyal to the revolutionary teachings of Marxism-Leninism and the cause of socialism? The Party of Labour of Albania could not and cannot agree with such an opportunistic stand towards the dangerous revisionist gang of Tito, which is an agency of imperialism and an enemy of socialism and communism, of the Party of Labour of Albania and the Albanian people. In the struggle against the modern revisionism, especially against Tito's revisionist clique, the Party of Labour of Albania has taken and always takes into consideration the valuable teachings of great Lenin, who stressed powerfully that opportunism constitutes a serious danger for the very existence of the socialist order. These important teachings of Lenin were all the more understandable for our party, because it had proved on its back what does Yugoslav revisionism means, not only in theory but also in practice, because, in fact, Tito's clique has never renounced, either before 1948 or after 1955, the plots and diversion against the People's Republic of Albania and the Party of Labour of Albania, but, on the contrary, has increased them. Therefore, the struggle of the Party of Labour of Albania against the Yugoslav revisionism was an important internationalist task of our party as a Marxist, Leninist party, and at the same time its sacred duty to defend our socialist homeland against the aims and the plots of the Yugoslav revisionists. Some of the Soviet leaders did not like this stand of the Party of Labour of Albania, which was contrary to and constituted a hindrance for their schemes of rapprochement and embrace with the Titoite clique. The slogan started circulating that the Albanians are hot-blooded, they view things narrowly and conduct the struggle against the Yugoslav leaders from the positions of nationalism, that the Albanians want to capture the flag of anti-revisionist and that they are increasing the value of Tito's clique, etc., etc. But our party did not waver from its principled positions and continued consistently and uncompromisingly the struggle against the Yugoslav revisionists. This stand of our party has never been to the liking of Enver Hoxha, and is one of the reasons explaining his so fierce a stand against the Party of Labour of Albania and its leadership. The stand of Enver Hoxha's group towards the Yugoslav revisionism, in fact, is not a stand different only from that of the Party of Labour of Albania, but from that of all the international Communist and Workers movement, from the stand expressed in the Moscow Declarations of 1957 and 1960, where revisionism is described as the main danger in the international Communist and Workers movement, and the Yugoslav revisionism as underminer of the socialist camp and the forces of peace. Thus, it is obvious that the Soviet leadership is trying to mitigate the struggle against opportunism and revisionism in the communist movement. Here lies also the source of all the attempts to distort the clear thesis of the two Moscow Declarations on revisionism as the main danger in the Communist and Workers movement, and to bring to the foreground the struggle against dogmatism. For our party it has become clear with every passing day that by accepting by words the need of fighting against revisionism and not doing it in fact, Enver Hoxha and those who follow him, under the pretext of the struggle against dogmatism, are fighting against Marxism-Leninism, are making efforts to reject the fundamental theses of the revolutionary doctrine of proletariat, precisely as Tito tried to do earlier and as if tried to do in the past the opportunists and revisionists of the various brands. What were the consequences of the spreading of the various opportunist viewpoints, of the unprincipled struggle against J.V. Stalin and the policy of reconciliation with Tito's treacherous revisionist clique, persistently pursued by Enver Hoxha and his group? Although they raised to the skies, with a great noise, the wonderful consequences allegedly brought about by the criticism of the personality cult of J.V. Stalin and the normalization of relations with Yugoslavia, although they present the questions as if with the 20th Congress a new era started, in the development and further strengthening of the world communist movement, the facts speak entirely to the contrary. These distorted viewpoints and actions became a banner in the hands of the opportunist and revisionist elements in many countries to launch their revisionist attacks against the Marxist, Leninist parties. This happened in the communist parties of the United States of America, of Denmark, of Netherlands, of Italy, of France, of Great Britain, etc. Under the influence of the opportunist viewpoints presented by Enver Hoxha to the 20th Congress, revisionism was revived and assumed a large dissemination in many communist and workers' parties, becoming an extremely serious danger for the entire international communist movement, precisely under the slogans of the struggle against the Stalinist despotism borrowed from the secret report on the personality cult and its consequences, which, strange enough, fell into the hands of the reactionary circles of the West and was reproduced by them in tons. The imperialist reaction and the modern revisionists, especially the Belgrade revisionist renegades, enemies of socialism, of the Soviet Union and of the peoples of all the countries of the socialist camp, organized the counter-revolutionary actions against the socialist order in Poland and the counter-revolutionary coup in Hungary, precisely under the protection of these opportunist theses, of the attacks against Stalin and the appeasing attitudes of Enver Hoxha with the Yugoslav revisionists. Tito's renegade gang was enlivened still more. It was given free hand to develop broadly its undermining activity against the socialist camp and the international communist movement. For us it is clear that such a conclusion is not acceptable either to Enver Hoxha or to his followers. But it is logical to raise the question, why precisely after the 20th Congress were immediately enlivened the renegades and the revisionists in the ranks of the communist and workers' parties of the different countries? The Yugoslav revisionist clique raised again its head and all of them together launched a frontal attack against Marxism-Leninism. Why, let us say, the theses of the 19th or the 18th Congresses of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union did not become their banner? There is only one explanation here: because some theses which were said at the 20th Congress were of an opportunist nature, therefore they constituted the ideological food for the renegades and the revisionists in their struggle against Marxism-Leninism, because the stand towards Stalin and Tito's clique were anti-Marxist. Therefore they were utilized so successfully by the enemies of Marxism and socialism for their aims. These bitter consequences were felt in Albania, too. In our country, the opportunist elements of the Tukjakova and Bedrispahi type, as well as many other elements expelled from the party for anti-party activity, were activated and with the direct instigation of the Yugoslav revisionists, organized the plot at the party conference for the city of Tirana in April 1956. It is known that a major role in this plot was played by the traitor Panajit Plaku, an old agent of the Yugoslav espionage, to whom, after he fled from the country, Enver Hoxha proposed ever since 1957 to be given political asylum to him in the Soviet Union. The slogans of these traitors were the demagogical slogans of liberalization and democratization of the proletarian dictatorship, of normalization of relations with Yugoslavia, of rehabilitation of Kochizaks and other anti-party elements condemned earlier, etc. It is significant that precisely at that time, in April-May 1956, the Soviet leadership, through Mstislav and P. Pospíšil, tried to persuade our party to rehabilitate the traitor Kochizaks, an enemy of the party and the Albanian people, an agent of Tito's clique, shot for his hostile activity which was aimed at liquidating the party and the people's power and at turning Albania into a seventh republic of Titoite Yugoslavia. And Khrushchev's anti-Marxist stand on the above-mentioned questions caused thus a great damage to our common cause, socialism and communism. However, the international communist and workers' movement managed to cope successfully with the onslaught of the revisionist renegades. The ranks of the communist and workers' parties were strengthened, and this is due to the strength and firmness of the fraternal communist and workers' parties, to the vitality of the ideas of Marxism-Leninism. And thus will always happen. Marxism-Leninism is the banner of victory. Therefore its enemies, the revisionists and opportunists, have failed and will always fail shamefully. From the above said, it follows clearly that the nature of our disagreements has been entirely ideological and political. That our party has not agreed with some opportunist viewpoints and actions of Enver Hoxha as concerns some vital questions of the present-day world development and the international communist and workers' movement. Viewpoints which are contrary to some of the fundamental principles of Marxism-Leninism and constitute a serious violation of the 1957 and 1960 declarations of the communist and workers' parties. But the existence of these wrong viewpoints among the Soviet leaders is only half of the evil. The greatest evil is that they try to impose at any condition their opportunistic concepts to all. The communist and workers' parties, not stopping for this purpose even before the pressure, blackmail and brutal attacks against those fraternal parties and their leaders that do not agree with the revisionist theses of Enver Hoxha, that oppose them and resolutely defend Marxism-Leninism. Here lies the greatest evil. Here lies also the cause that relations between our country and the Soviet leadership have become tense, seeing that his multifarious attempts to kneel down the Party of Labor of Albania and to impose on it his anti-Marxist viewpoints have failed in face of the firm Marxist-Leninist stand of our party in wanting to justify before his party and before the international communist movement his impermissible, hostile activity against the Party of Labor of Albania and the People's Republic of Albania. And Khrushchev has gone over to wild and public slanders like those he and other Soviet leaders made at the 22nd Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The fact that he chose the rostrum of the 22nd Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union to carry out the trial against our party. The fact that he deceived the representatives of some fraternal parties to express themselves uncomradely against our party in their greetings to the Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, throws light on his putschist methods, on his tactic of surprise, on the one-sided imposing of his desire upon the international communist and workers' movement, on the non-observance of the fundamental principles governing the relations between the fraternal communist and workers' parties, which have been established jointly and have been outlined in the Moscow declarations, to examine the activity of a communist and workers' party, to express the viewpoint whether it stands on correct positions or not, can judge only an international forum, an international meeting of the communist and workers' parties, after hearing in detail the arguments of that party. But Khrushchev feared to ask the convocation of such a meeting because he was convinced that he would not succeed in condemning our Party of Labor. For this reason he did not invite to the 22nd Congress our party also, because its word would bring to the fore the truth on the Albanian-Soviet relations, would expose his anti-Marxist viewpoints and activity, would reject all his entirely unfounded slanders and charges. The method used by the first secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union to attack one-sidedly our party is known in the International Communist and Workers' Movement. He applied this tactics in Bucharest, too, where with false and one-sided charges he tried to kneel down Marxist-Leninist parties into compromise by means of a quick, unpondered and hasty pronunciation the representatives of the fraternal parties, but that despite his efforts, he did not succeed. On the contrary, Khrushchev was forced to agree to the holding of the Moscow meeting in November 1960, where correct debates were conducted, where it was clearly seen that his viewpoints did not meet with the enthusiastic support of the participants, and this is expressed also in the very documents approved by the representatives of 81 parties in which Khrushchev is brutally violating in all his activity. Therefore he, in order to attack our party, since he feared to convene an international conference, resorted to his putschist methods, utilizing for this purpose the 22nd Congress. In this way, Khrushchev has effectively sabotaged any future international meeting also, because by attacking one-sidedly and publicly our party, he has put the Party of Labour of Albania on conditions of inequality. At the 22nd Congress, Khrushchev and his followers charged our party that it allegedly, with its actions, is disrupting the unity, is splitting the socialist camp and the international communist movement. One must have lost any feeling of responsibility or seriousness to say such a thing, who is in reality undermining our unity, the Party of Labour of Albania or the leadership of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union headed by Khrushchev. Our party, which has always observed the principle that our disagreements should be solved through the party way, on basis of the principles of the Moscow Declarations of 1957 and 1960, or the Soviet leadership, which has trampled underfoot these principles and has embarked upon the anti-Marxist path of pressure, blackmail and is openly calling for counter-revolution in socialist Albania. The Party of Labour of Albania has never spoken publicly about our differences. It has only through the party way and at party meetings, openly and courageously criticized the wrong viewpoints and actions of the Soviet leaders, while Khrushchev was the first to speak publicly from the rostrum of the 22nd Congress not only about the existence of our differences but also to Vamagdal, to slander at full daylight against our party and people's power, presenting it as a regime of terror, where right and left there are prisons and firing squads, using the language of Rankovic, who has said that in Albania there ain't the barbed wire in the frontier guard, but our party stands for the unity, for its further strengthening, but for a sound, iron unity, not for an anemic and sick unity, precisely because it stands for the iron unity of the international communist and workers' movement and the socialist camp. It has courageously and through the party way criticized Khrushchev's anti-Marxist manifestations and actions, which weaken this unity. We greatly regret the fact that some leaders of the fraternal parties joined with Khrushchev's wrong viewpoints. We don't want to seek the causes which forced them to take this stand. We understand very well the difficult position in which they have found themselves, but can their one-sided position be called correct, a priori, when the majority of the representatives of the fraternal parties have no knowledge of the development of relations between our party and the Soviet leadership? Is it correct to take this or that stand, when one hears only the arguments of one side, while the other side has been deprived of the right to state its own viewpoint? Or in the communist movement should be established new principles, according to which the big one must be heard, the little one not. The big is right, while the little is always wrong? According to our opinion, such reasoning is not at all correct and is not compatible with the Leninist norms of relations between the fraternal parties. Such a stand does not help the strengthening of the unity of the international communist and workers' movement, the strengthening of the socialist camp, but weakens it and will later create great troubles in spite of this. At the 22nd Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Khrushchev was not supported by all the representatives of the fraternal communist and workers' parties. Out of the 84 delegations which attended the proceedings of the Congress and spoke or sent by writing their greetings, 34 representatives of the fraternal parties did not join the Khrushchev slanders and charges against our party. They did not speak about the disagreements existing between the Party of Labour of Albania and the Soviet leadership. Surely, many of them may have their remarks as concerns the work of the Party of Labour of Albania, but at the 22nd Congress, which was the Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, of a definite party, they did not consider it appropriate to speak about a question which concerns the entire international communist movement, taking thus a correct Marxist-Leninist stand. We must say also that even the mass of the home delegates to the 22nd Congress did not express themselves about the Soviet-Albanian disagreements. They did not support Khrushchev in his attacks and slanders against the Party of Labour of Albania. Out of 88 delegates who took part in discussions in the Congress, only 14 spoke against our party. They all were members of the Soviet leadership. Our Party of Labour thanks for their principled and correct stand both the representatives of the fraternal communist and workers' parties who did not support Khrushchev in his own-sided attacks against our party and the delegates of the glorious Communist Party of Lenin, who, preserving the Bolshevik traditions and the Leninist principles of objective judgments of any question, did not support Khrushchev in this anti-Marxist act. From the rostrum of the 22nd Congress, among the numerous slandering charges, the first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, spoke also of the allegedly lack of democracy in our party, of the allegedly violations of the Leninist norms in its inner life. This, of course, is an open interference in the internal affairs of our party, but despite this we can say to these defenders of democracy, look better your business, for not in the Party of Labour of Albania, but in your parties there are many scandalous examples of the violation of the most elementary rules of democracy. Dmitry Polyansky, on attacking the anti-party group, and especially Comrade Clement Voroshilov, surely refrained himself from telling in detail all the backstage he and his companions had organized at the time of the plenary session of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. In summer 1957, Polyansky has hidden this from the Congress, but he has told us their friend Lyry Belashova, who reported it to our party. Let us take another example when the Tirana Tribunal gave the deserved verdict against the agents of U.S. imperialism, of Yugoslavia and Greece. Team Sejko and Company, out of the whole press of the European people's democracies, only the newspaper, Trud, the organ of the Bulgarian working class, reported correctly this trial, but immediately, within the day, by the most democratic methods, it was announced that the president and the two secretaries of the Central Council of the Bulgarian trade unions had been dismissed from their posts, and this was because the revisionist Tito on the same day lodged a serious protest with the Bulgarian government in connection with the report given on the Tirana trial by this newspaper. Finally, those who speak of internal democracy and of the observance of the party norms, we are referring here especially to Pamiro Togliatti. Does he consider regular, democratic his action at the 22nd Congress when he spoke and condemned our party? He did not know before what has happened and how the relations between our party and the Soviet leadership have been developed. At least our party has not given the Italian Communist Party any material. His Central Committee had not adopted before any decision by which to denounce our party and thus to authorize its representatives to condemn it. At least we do not know of any such fact. Then of what democracy are speaking these leaders who scandalize themselves without cause for the fate of a person, and who, when it is the question of the fate of a party, of 50,000 communists and an entire people, make offending statements without any responsibility and in flagrant contradiction with the elementary rules not only of the party democracy, but also of the simple logic and human conscience? Pamiro Togliatti threw at us the Roman anathema, by charging us that we are splitting the unity of the international communist movement. On what did Togliatti rely when he a few years ago attacked publicly the Soviet socialist system and preached polycentrism and the zones of influence in the international communist movement? He has not and will not have any fact against us, but with his own anti-Marxist theses he has greatly served the revisionist Tito. Nevertheless, strangely enough, nobody rose against Togliatti's revisionist viewpoints, and Khrushchev, who speaks so much of democratic methods, patience and internationalism, has resorted against our party to the most anti-Marxist methods, methods which are entirely alien to the relations between the socialist countries, in order to subdue the Party of Labour of Albania, to prevent it from having its own viewpoint, to impose on it his anti-Marxist viewpoints. He and his followers have not stopped before any measure, not only as concerns the relations between our parties, but also as concerns the relations between our socialist states. Today we do not want to enter into detail and dwell long on these questions, because there are many facts and countless documents which illustrate objectively these, but will mention that as a result of the adoption of anti-Marxist methods by the Soviet leadership for the settlement of existing disagreements, as a result of the consecutive pressure both in the economic and the political and military fields, the relations between our country and the Soviet Union have been greatly aggravated. This process has started since the second half of last year, that is after the Bucharest meeting. Since then, and Khrushchev. Instead of agreeing to settle patiently the ideological and political disagreements existing between our party and the Soviet leadership, made them public and extended them to the state relations also. Thus in the economic field, all the credits the Soviet Union had accorded to our country for the third five-year plan were suspended, and this was done with a view of sabotaging the economic plan of our country, without any reason, and one-sidedly were withdrawn from Albania all the Soviet specialists whom our economy badly needed, and we had officially asked to stay, under the pretext of starting from this year with the repayment of the old credits. The Soviet side has almost entirely suspended the trade relations on a clearing basis. Scholarships were cut to all the Albanian civilian and military students studying in the Soviet Union, etc., etc. The economic pressures have been accompanied with pressure and restrictive measures in the military field, too. On the other hand, it is well known by all that the press of the People's Republic of Albania is continuously writing on the life and the successes of the Soviet Union in the communist building, supports the various moves and proposals the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and the Soviet government concerning various international questions, whereas the Soviet press, to the contrary, since almost 1.5 years has established a strict silence blockade against Albania, while it does not let escape the least chance to write even concerning a single positive word which some British lord has occasionally said. The Soviet press does not write a single line about Albania, let alone the Party of Labour of Albania, as if it did not exist at all on the earth, either the People's Republic of Albania or the Albanian people, who are building up socialism and struggling for peace in the wolf's mouth. Surrounded on all sides by the imperialists and their tools, the ice of silence was broken only at the 22nd Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union by Khrushchev, but it was broken only to slander and vomit gall against the Party of Labour of Albania and the People's Republic of Albania, in these anti-Marxist and hostile actions towards the Albanian people. And Khrushchev has been followed also by some leaders of the socialist countries of Europe. They are all together doing their utmost to isolate Albania economically, politically and militarily, by creating around her a sanitary cordon. And Khrushchev forgets that in the century of the triumph of Leninism there can be no cordon to isolate a people and a party which are firmly fighting for the triumph of socialism and of communism. There can be no cordon regardless of how organized and strong it may be, to resist to the Marxist-Leninist truth. Any cordon will be smashed and its organizers will shamefully fail. The first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party and chairman of the Council of Ministers of the Soviet Union did not confine himself to this. Seeing that all his pressure, blockades and blackmail did not bring the result he desired, could not kneel down our party and people, from the rostrum of the 22nd Congress he made an open call for the overthrowing by means of a counter-revolutionary coup the leadership of the Party of Labour of Albania, for the liquidation of the party, something which he reserves himself to do even when it is the question of the governments of the capitalist countries, because he considers it an interference in the internal affairs. He said, to put an end to the personality cult means for Enver Hoxha and others to give up in essence the commanding posts in the party and the state, but they do not want to do this. However, we are convinced that the time will come when the Albanian communists, when the Albanian people, will have their say, and then the Albanian leaders will have to give account for the damage they have caused to their country, to their people, to the cause of building of socialism in Albania. The Albanian people and the Albanian communists gave the reply to Khrushchev by means of hundreds and thousands of telegrams and letters, a part of which has been published by our press. Our party and people have heard continuously for 17 years in succession calls for the overthrow of our people's power, for the liquidation of our party and its leadership. They have heard and are hearing them every year from the USA State Department, from the US, British and other imperialists, from Franco's nationalist Spain radio, from Tito's traitors revisionist gang, from the Greek monarcho-fascists, etc. These have even hatched up plots to achieve their aims. We have heard now such calls also from Nikita Khrushchev, who in fact is joining them in the hostile activity against the Albanian people and its Party of Labour. On what have the imperialists and their tools relied in their activity against the people's power and the party in our country? Their army has been the scum of our society, the degenerate and anti-party elements, people sold to the foreign imperialist intelligence services, whom our people recalls only with a feeling of deep hate, contempt and scorn. This will be also the army of Nikita Khrushchev, and it cannot be otherwise. The whole our people, old and young, all the honest and patriotic people of our homeland, party and non-party people, have rallied today more than ever around our glorious party and its correct Marxist-Leninist line, which expresses the vital interests of our people and meets the common interests of our great cause, socialism and communism. In the face of the iron unity of our party and people, in the face of this invincible force, will shamefully fail all the hostile actions and the brutal interferences of Nikita Khrushchev, as have failed earlier and will always fail the entire hostile activity and all the plots of the imperialists, the Yugoslav revisionists, the Greek monarcho-fascists and other enemies of the Albanian people, its Party of Labour and the People's Republic of Albania. At the 22nd Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Khrushchev accused our party and its leadership of anti-Sovietism, considering any remark and criticism towards his anti-Marxist viewpoints and actions, made in party meetings and according to Leninist rules, an attack against the Soviet Union and the Soviet peoples. This is a monstrous slander and distortion. Our party and people for 20 years in succession have been educated in the spirit of unbounded love and firm loyalty towards the glorious Soviet Union and the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. They have demonstrated this love and loyalty by deeds in their common struggle against fascism, in their joint efforts to build up the socialist and communist society, for peace and the freedom of peoples. They have shown it by their unswerving and principled struggle against our common enemies, the imperialists and the modern revisionists, especially after the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and after the counter-revolution in Hungary, when the enemies of socialism launched wild attacks and slanders against the Soviet order and Soviet soldiers were attacked on the back. The entire 20-year-old heroic struggle and untiring activity of our party and people for the continuous tempering and strengthening of the sacred Albanian Soviet friendship cannot be liquidated so easily by means of some unfounded accusations and base slanders. The Albanian Soviet friendship has deep roots. It will live in centuries, contrary to the desires and attempts of our criticizers, who does indeed defend the Soviet Union and its prestige. Nikita Khrushchev, who with his unprincipled attacks and slanders against J.V. Stalin has discredited the glorious Soviet Union, presenting it like a country where the fiercest terror has reigned, the same as in the Hitlerite Germany, or the Party of Labour of Albania that has defended and is defending the Soviet Union from the fierce attacks of the imperialist and revisionist propaganda, which Nikita Khrushchev has provided with weapons. Who does defend the Soviet Union and its prestige? Nikita Khrushchev, who with his anti-Marxist actions, attacks, pressure and blockades against the People's Republic of Albania is providing with weapons the imperialists to stain before the world public opinion the Soviet Union and its Communist Party, or the Party of Labour of Albania, which has shown and is showing that is anti Marxist dictions have nothing in common with the principles and the internationalist traditions of the glorious Soviet Union and its great party of Lenin. That they are an unfortunate and temporary sickness in their sound body, our party heard with patience what was said at the 22nd Congress in its address. We, too, are saying our own viewpoint concerning these questions. The Party of Labor of Albania, with common pure conscience, appeals to the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, appeals to the new Central Committee elected by the 22nd Congress to judge with Leninist equity, with objectivity and calmness, not unaccidentally, on the situation created in the relations between our two parties and our two countries. Our party has always been ready, for the sake of the unity of the communist movement and the socialist camp, of the interests of our countries, to settle the existing disagreements. But it has always been and is of the opinion that these questions should be solved correctly and only in a Marxist-Leninist way, in the conditions of equality and not of pressure and dictate we hope for and are confident in the sense of justice of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Our party and people, regardless of the attacks, slanders and the hostile actions directed against them, will guard untouched in their hearts the pure feelings of friendship with the fraternal peoples of the Soviet Union. Our party has taught us to love the Soviet Union, the homeland of the great Lenin and Stalin, both in good and bad times. For us the glorious Soviet Union and the Soviet people, the great party of Bolsheviks, have been, are and remain the most beloved friends of our hearts, our liberators from the fascist yoke, and our loyal and resolute allies in the struggle for the upbuilding of socialism in our country. With the Soviet Union, with the Soviet people, with the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, we have been and will be linked forever. Our party and people have and are following with a special sympathy the glorious successes and efforts achieved by the Soviet peoples, under the leadership of their glorious Communist Party, in all the fields of communist construction, and consider them also as victories of the Albanian people in the joint struggle for the triumph of the great cause of socialism and communism. We are deeply convinced that the objectives and the tasks set by the 22nd Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union will be achieved as always successfully, for the good of the peoples of the Soviet Union, of the entire socialist camp, to the benefit of the sacred cause of socialism and communism, of peace and the freedom of the people of the whole world. Our party and people, as always, will struggle for the cause of socialism and communism united in the socialist camp, alongside the fraternal peoples of the Soviet Union, alongside the fraternal Chinese people, alongside all the peoples of the countries of the socialist camp. Comrades, the entire 20-year-old life and activity of our party, as well as the facts of the present-day reality, show clearly that our party has always had a correct general line, that in connection with the present-day important questions preoccupying the international communist movement too, particularly in connection with the question of the Albanian-Soviet relations, it stands on correct Marxist, Leninist and internationalist positions, deeply convinced that they stand for the truth. Our people and party, united like a single body, with a common pure conscience and a firm determination, will in the future too, follow unswervingly their correct path, and in this path they will win. A guarantee for this is our heroic and indomitable people, our glorious party, the party of the popular revolution, the party which during these 20 years won over fascism and brought freedom to our people and homeland, which triumphed over the backwardness, over hunger and ignorance, and has embarked our country on the road to socialism, to progress and culture, the party which, as a loyal offspring of our heroic people, has frustrated any provocation and plot which was aimed at bringing back the enslavement and poverty to our homes. A guarantee for our future victories will be our support and friendship with the Soviet peoples, with the Chinese people, with all the friendly peoples of the socialist camp and others, with which our party, as a party loyal to the principles of the proletarian internationalism, has linked with an everlasting and invincible friendship our small but heroic people. We are experiencing some temporary difficulties due to the fact that we have to face not only the attacks and the intrigues of our sworn enemies, the US and other imperialists, their allies and lackeys the Yugoslav revisionists, but because we have to repulse also the new slanders and attacks which are being made against us. But the difficulties have never scared and bent either our party, or our people. By closing our ranks around the party, by strengthening the vigilance, by multiplying our efforts to successfully realize, better than ever, the tasks for the fulfillment of the state plan in all the fields, we shall succeed. We are convinced that in this struggle and in these efforts we shall have the support of all our friends, of all the peoples of the socialist countries, including first and foremost the Soviet people, of all the communists of the world, including first and foremost the Soviet communists, who sooner or later will see that the blow directed against our party and people is unjust, is dangerous for all the communists of the world. With this confidence we are celebrating the great holiday of the 44th anniversary of the October Socialist Revolution and the great holiday of the 20th anniversary of the founding of our glorious party. With this confidence, with the revolutionary banner of the victorious Leninism, with the unfurled banner of our heroic party, we, the Albanian communists, together with our entire patriotic and fighting people, shall march forward with sure steps towards new victories, for the glory of Marxism-Leninism, for the glory of communism, for the glory of our socialist homeland. Long live the 44th anniversary of the great October Socialist Revolution. Long live the 20th anniversary of the Party of Labor of Albania. Glory to the victorious Marxism-Leninism, the banner of the victories of our party and people. Long live our heroic and indomitable people. Glory to the Party of Labor of Albania. The end. More titles from us. http://www.amazon.com